Welcome to the show, We the People Real Estate Podcast. I am honored to have here Anthony GANNAIO.
GANNAIO.
GANNAIO, I'm so
It's a
sorry.
hard
I
name.
can't, his name is
Everyone
hard
messes it
to
up.
pronounce for a Cuban American like myself. But Anthony, I'm so honored to have you here, man. Anthony is a friend of mine from church. We are here to talk about God. We're here to talk about history. We're here to maybe put some unity into this country that I think is needed. I think you have like some very interesting things from the moment that I first met you, and you just opened your mouth to speak in our church group. I will say this, before I begin our introduction here for the show. I came into church skeptic, kind of like questioning whether, this is going to be a long-term thing or not. Honestly, I wasn't even thinking that any church will be a long-term thing for me because I have been in and out of churches, and you are one of the persons that really made me want to come back to church and learn more and try to understand this Bible book that is so amazing and has so many teachings and learnings about so many different things that I had ignored for so long. And the way that you would express, certain things that we were reading at that time, it just hit me real good. I'm like a science type guy. I came to the Bible by Jordan Peterson, the way that he explained that in his Bible lectures.
People, right? Yeah.
Right, because before he opened the book, he right away just started demanding some respect for this book. Like, it's been around for so long,
Yeah.
and people disrespect it without even opening it or trying to understand it. So yeah, all the respect to you. You are a teacher, a language teacher. Is that correct?
Yeah, I teach Latin. I teach at a local Christian school around here attached to
awesome,
our
man.
church. So,
Yeah.
and
So we'll get into the show here. Let me go ahead and do my introduction real quick, and we'll get right into it, guys. Make sure you share, like, subscribe. Let's go. What's going on, everybody? This is We the People, a real estate podcast. Let's begin. All right. Saying hi to JG. Who's JG,
JG, probably my brother or my
All
dad.
right, brother. Welcome to the chat. All right, Anthony. So I would like to start at the beginning. I think that first off, this is a conversation that would probably interest, anybody, believer or not. I think you should get curious about God. I think we all should eventually. So if you're curious about God, if you're curious about truth or seeking the truth or have any questions or anything, please go ahead and comment in the chat. And so Anthony, I'd like to start from your perspective, from the beginning. What do you think when it comes to our beginnings? What do you believe in terms of how everything started, like the Big Bang? I know we've had already some conversations on this. Can you please elaborate on this stuff, and then we'll go forward from there?
For sure. I mean, just like a quick quick note about like where I come from on this. I grew up in an evangelical Christian household, sort of Southern Baptist, just a basic, evangelical household. And so I grew up being taught the Bible, immersed in the faith. I got baptized when I was like 5 or 6 or something.
Okay.
We went to church every Sunday. I went to private schools my whole life. I went to Christian schools my whole life. But I never think that I really had an authentic faith of my own until I was about 20. So just as a preface to everything, that's kind of my background. And when I went through that period of time, there was a long period of time in my teenage years especially where I just completely rejected faith. I hated religion. I would have considered myself something like an anti-theist, like religion should not be on the planet kind of thing.
Wow.
Really harsh, but it wasn't like intellectually developed. When I was growing up, and this might come out a lot, when I was growing up, I was surrounded by people who loved Jesus and who loved God and who were doing their best. But I also know that there are some books out right now that study this. I'd recommend like Mark Knoll, Scandal, the Evangelical Mind is a book that comes to mind about this, that has analyzed this movement of evangelicalism in America. And one of the things that it does is it prioritizes personal experience over thinking and over analysis. And that's good, right? Like, you don't want to get lost in your head. You don't need an expert to come or a priest to come, right, and explain to you everything and put a position between you and God, right?
Right.
But on the other hand, what do you do when you have questions? What do you do if you ask, where did we all come from? What about the age of the earth? And the answer that's given to you doesn't make sense to you, even if you're a kid and you're probably the one who's wrong.
Yeah.
You know, does that kid have the ability to ask the question? And I think growing up, I didn't have that ability. So growing up, what was taught to me was what most people, I think, go through, which is that, you know, the earth is about 6,000 years old. God created it in 6 24-hour days. On the seventh day, he rested. Evolution, any kind of naturalism is just a complete myth, fabrication. If there was dinosaurs, you know, they were not as old as people think that they are. That kind of stuff. And just off the bat, I would say that Christians who believe that today I don't think they're wrong. My position about the specifics of how the earth came about, what's cool about Christianity, I believe, is that within reason, and this is the huge thing to emphasize, within a certain set of guardrails, like you can't come out here and be like, yeah, God doesn't exist and he just made the world like a watch and he tuned it and then he set it off like a deist would believe, right? Like a Thomas, not Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine or someone like that would believe. Or he just made the world and then set it off. He doesn't get involved at all. We can't, as Christians, believe that. But if, say you have a Christian who believes that the earth is 6,000 years old, it's called young earth creationism. Well, there have also been in fact, the majority of Christians also who have entertained other ideas like that there was a gap between one of the days of creation, that maybe this is called the day-age theory, for instance, that each day of creation represents a certain longer period of time. And then the evidence for that comes from the fact that, well, you know, it says it was evening and it was morning one day, but the sun hadn't been created at that point, and the stars and the moon hadn't been created. So how do you make sense of all that?
Right.
What I want to bring more than anything to any conversation like this that can get contentious is, let's set up the guardrails first, and let's see the space within that where Christians can disagree and still be orthodox and still take seriously the Bible, hold it to the highest level, because that is something that Christians believe, right? Is that there's this book.
Anthony, can you define the word orthodox for me?
Yeah. So it's a word that comes from Greek. It literally just means right teaching, orthodoxy, or straight teaching. So orthodontist, straight teeth.
Okay.
Orthodoxy, straight teaching. It's
Got
like
it.
straight talk, you know, what's real.
Okay.
And so that matters for Christians. What is able to be talked about within the bounds of orthodoxy, I think, is young earth creationism and forms of old earth creationism, and I'm open to for even forms of theistic evolution. Now, not everyone would agree with me that saying that all three of those things. Some people would want to say, no, there's no young earth creationism. And some people would say, no, it's only young earth creationism, or something in between. But I think in the time where we're at, we're polarized, right?
Yeah.
Everything's polarized. Everything that's polarized gets worse, you know, because of how social media, in fact, impacts the way that we think. So we should try to go back into church history and go back into the history of our tradition, people who held the Bible up to be God's infallible, inerrant word of God, and wrestle with what they thought. And so for me personally, I'm somewhere between an old earth guy and a theistic evolution guy. I'm not positive. I haven't done the exhaustive research on everything. I'm not willing to kick anyone out of my church if they disagree with me.
Yeah.
But I am willing to say that the person who thinks that God had nothing to do with it is wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the guardrail.
Right.
So that's where I'm at.
So before you continue, if I can ask, so why did you exactly walk away from faith? Because your questions weren't answered, or was it an event that happened to you?
I mean, you know, it's
like, what was the moment that you're like, you know what, this is not for me? Did something specifically happen there, or was it a buildup of things?
So I did not have like a philosophically developed rejection of the faith. I had a lot of rules in my life that I didn't like.
Okay.
And I had questions that were not being answered. But since I was not being, I don't think, encouraged to think through those things, but rather just do what you're told.
Yeah.
My reaction to that was not, well, let me go think of some alternative explanation. My reaction was, I'm going to develop a different worldview in the way that I live. And so I'm just going to go do what I want. And so I did the rock star lifestyle, basically. I ended up on my own at 17. I got kind of kicked out of my house. Not kind of kicked out of my house. I got kicked out of my house. I was on my own. You know, I was really briefly had nowhere to stay, and then I was staying with a girl that I was dating at the time, and then eventually I kind of worked and got my own job. This was back when you could go grab a job and grind, and rent was a little easier to make. I don't know how people do it these days, man, but but I spent time trying a lot of stuff, just trying whatever felt good, I think. And for me, this is what I would say, like, if you have listeners who maybe not are philosophical people or who have like training in theory or because I know when I talk, like, sometimes people are like, whoa, you know, he's using a lot of words, I don't know what they mean. That's not
That's
how
why I
came to
asked what the
faith.
words mean.
right. And it's good. You have
But that is good. Like I respect people that have dedicated their lives to that aspect. Like I didn't, for example, and you know, I've dedicated my life to some of this, for example. You know, some of the stuff that you see here, and I want to glorify God with the things that I do. It feels like is what I'm desiring to do, which is why I brought you to the show, because man, I've been wanting to talk to you. I wanted to build a little bit of an audience first before we even have one-on-one interviews like this. But yeah, all right. So let's go back to the beginning.
Okay.
So don't remove God from the conversation.
Yeah.
Why? Because if I can explain my why, let me know if I'm wrong. I believe that you know, I was too ignorant to understand that, you know, cells don't grow themselves. Science was already there.
Yeah.
We discovered it. Math was already there. We discovered it. Do you feel like this stuff to be true, or?
Yeah, absolutely. If I could again plug another resource that really does a good job explaining, there's a YouTube channel called Truth Unites, run by a scholar and a pastor called Gavin Ortland.
Okay.
Really, really helpful for anyone who's kind of coming from an average kind of secular, just normal person background.
Yeah.
Who didn't grow up in the church necessarily their whole life, getting immersed in this stuff.
Yeah.
Because these questions, in terms of like theism as a worldview, the idea that God exists, and then Christian theism, right? Because there's different theisms. There's Hindu theism and Islamic theism. They all believe in God.
Yeah.
But so different, right?
Yeah.
Christian theism, I plugged this channel because his most recent video does a really good job talking about why Christian theism, Christians believe, is the worldview that can give the most amount, indeed, some people believe it can give entirely the explanation to reduce down the unexplained phenomenon in the world to zero.
Okay.
It's the best worldview that takes account of why we see things in the world, where emotions come from, psychology, political activity, why people behave in certain ways economically. I mean, a classical, robust Christianity that's connected with its own roots. I mean, Christianity is a 2,000-year-old movement, you know?
Yeah.
And we're not like the first guys who thought of any of this. And
Right.
I grew up never hearing about all these people who came before me who loved Jesus, who believed in God, and who used their talents of mind and of means and of body to explore what does it mean for Jesus to be Lord in every single area of life, whether that's biology or psychology or economics or teaching or podcast making or underwater basket weaving, whatever. So yeah, ultimately, like, that's what I would say initially about theism is that, like, if you really consider, hey, how do you explain where all this came from? Where do organisms come from? Theism actually affords not just an answer, but I would say, like, the best answer.
Okay.
It reduces the amount of brute facts down to zero. A brute fact is basically like an unexplained remainder.
I like how you're already defining the words as you say.
I'm a teacher, so sometimes I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we want worldviews that reduce brute facts down as much as possible. So someone with a worldview, a Marxist worldview, says that everything is boiled down to class conflict, and the eventual, in a very orthodox Marxist perspective, the eventual rise of socialism and then communism. Well, one of the things that, even if you look at the history of Marxism itself, Marxism had no account for, well, when we give, farmers, the proletariat, the sublime theory that Karl Marx handed down, they don't always rebel. Why not?
Yeah.
That's because Karl Marx didn't have a psychology, an anthropology that could account for ways that people would maybe in his opinion, love their chains. And so then you have critical theory coming up, and critical theory has to step in and provide that. Well, Christianity, all traditions work this way, but Christianity had those questions answered thousands of years before. And those questions have been developing for thousands of years, and so they're worth taking seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. So what about let's throw in some dinosaurs into the equation here.
Yeah.
So I had an interesting conversation with you on dinosaurs, and I like to retouch on it because your explanation like really made me feel like, okay, that makes sense. So at least for me. So let's throw dinosaurs in there. Okay, they're like, so there's definitely there's evidence for different types of beasts that have survived through our world. Did the dinosaurs survived alongside us, or were they before us? How do you explain that in your findings?
So this is like a place where, again, if I have a brother sitting across the table from me or a sister sitting across the table, and they want to say something like, every dinosaur bone is a forgery.
A forgery.
Like that.
Like it's fake.
Like they're all fake. Because there are Christians who believe that, right?
Really?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But that's a minority position.
Okay.
So but that would be the extreme position on the other side. It's all fake. They're all from, carbon dating is not trustworthy, something like that. They're all way younger than we thought. They're just species that went extinct. Here, the first thing I want to say is that is not something you split your church over. That is not something you say, well, you can't be a Christian and believe that. Now, they might be wrong.
Yeah.
I think they're wrong. But this is what, again, the strength of Christianity as a worldview. What do you do with people who disagree with you? That is the first thing I would say is you keep them at the table. Now,
I would say, if I may interrupt you real quick, there's a big percentage of people in my life that hate the church because of priests in the news, corruption, etc. And my answer to them is always the same thing. Like, okay, so do you go to church for God or do you go to church for the priest?
Yeah.
And like, for example, our pastor Riley, like he's great in so many angles. I don't go to church for him.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody should be going to church for one person. We go to church to glorify God, to remember ourselves of the things that Jesus did. And maybe some other things that I'd like you to answer a little later.
Yeah.
But okay, so the dinosaurs.
So I think that we can trust scientists. And so here's why. I believe in a doctrine within Reformed Christianity, but other Christians like Catholics and non-Reformed Christians would potentially articulate this too. And the doctrine in the Reformed tradition is called common grace.
Okay.
So it's the idea that if God is...
Try to stay closer to him.
Yeah, my bad, man. I'm backing up a little bit. Sorry. The doctrine is if God is not just some dude with a beard in the sky, right? Yeah. He's not just this being. He is existence itself. Thomas Aquinas says his essence is his existence. And so he's less like a person or a table or like an object out in the world or even like in heaven. He's like the existence itself. He is the ground of being, as a phrase said it. If he is that, then every atheist, every pagan, every person who's wrong, whatever, in the world lives and continues to live, and their brain functions correctly, their mental processes work, they're able to look out in the world and accurately describe the material world, they're able to do science, they're able to function like humans because of God's grace, because God is sustaining them, because God is existence. He is beyond even the category of beings, he is being itself. And so that doctrine, common grace, he gives grace to everyone in the human race by virtue of them being, this is another Christian, I say these three Christianese, these are like words that you learn when you become a Christian, an image of God. Then we should not be surprised that even though Christianity teaches that humans are fallen and sinful, and that our minds are broken because of it, our hearts are broken, but our minds as well, they nevertheless can accurately describe reality because of common grace, because they are still the image of God. And so this is where Christians will disagree, of course, but I think that the doctrine of common grace gives us plenty of reason to believe scientists in general about these things, and that we ought to remind ourselves that there was another time in the church, in human history, in the history of the church, where there were some astronomical discoveries being made. And at the time, everyone thought the earth was at the center of the universe. And when they started suggesting that it was actually the sun at the center of the solar system, people were saying, hey, this is not what scripture says. This is not what we've always believed. It was seen as a threat. And again, this is a place, and this is before even the Reformation happened.
So, but did scripture say that or not?
Well, so that the earth is at the center.
Yeah.
So it's funny. There are people who believe that it does, and then there are people who think that those people are misinterpreting the scriptures. So
okay.
Yeah.
Do you know exactly where in the Bible they're misinterpreting?
No, I wish I would have prepared this, because I would have been able to pull this up.
That's okay.
There's one passage where I think in the Psalm, I believe it says, the Lord has established the earth on top of the pillars of the deep, I believe. And that's seen as like an argument for flat earth theory, for instance.
Okay.
But here's the thing, and we talked about this a little bit in the past. What if that's poetic imagery? What if that's not trying to be? We talked about the difference between the IKEA manual versus the map, or like the story or the parable. Even Jesus told these fictions. He used these stories. Now, people might hear what I'm saying and think, I don't think that the Bible is fiction. I think that the Bible is true, trustworthy, inerrant, and infallible.
Right. But there are things that are like metaphors, or that they're not literal to the sense, right? There's
absolutely.
Things that make you think deeper than what the word actually says.
Yeah, the Bible is a collection of 66 different books with many different genres of literature. There's entire books of the Bible that are poetry, like the Psalms, and I always say this to my students, I don't know about you, but like, do you go home and read stories of poetry when you go home? Like, we're not used to that.
Yeah.
What we like is facts. We like schematics and dictionaries and encyclopedias and FAQs and like, just give me the answer. Just do this.
Just Google it.
And that's a place where I think a lot of people, like Jordan Peterson, why does he speak to people? Because he's speaking to the fact that we are all Enlightenment people. We prioritize reason and facts, and we leave out the emotions. We leave out, intuition. We leave out some sort of basic things that he says, hey, this book is so important, so old. Why do we all dismiss it?
Yeah.
That's a logical point, but there's actually something that just hits you here about that. You're like, yeah, that's so simple. Why don't I think about that?
So many wars, so many people try to destroy all of it. How is it still alive?
And so if the Bible is God's word to us, and we are beings who are complex, we have minds, we have bodies, we have hearts, we have souls, we have feelings, we have emotions, we have dreams and hopes and fears. Why should we expect that the Bible is just going to speak to one part of that?
Right.
You feel me? It's going to speak to us both to satisfy our reason and our engineering brain, our right brain, left brain. I don't think that's a real thing, but the idea behind that is good, I think, and the poetic side, the artistic side. And it's going to speak to us in ways that are mysterious. I think about a parable that Jesus told where he speaks to them in parables about the four soils. He says, there are four types of, he says a person sows seed, some seed falls on rocky ground, some seed falls on the path and gets scorched, some seed falls in thorns and briars and it's and it raises up and it's choked, and then another seed jumps into the ground and bears fruit, and then he just pieces out. And he pieces out in the crowd, and it just says nothing. The crowds are just there. And then later on, the disciples come up to him and go, what did that mean? And actually, they didn't even say that. They said, why do you speak in parables? Why do you talk in this? Why do you invent these stories that no one understands, bro? Literally is what they're saying to him. And he looks at them and he goes, because it's given to you to understand them and not them. Now, what does that mean? Well, what's the difference between them and the crowd? Well, they came up and asked him. They asked him what it meant. They were willing to say they don't know, and they were willing to come up to him and say, there has to be some other meaning here than just what's face value here. You're not really talking about seeds, man. And he's like, yeah, you're right. I'm not. And then he explains it to them. And so, again, why I believe stuff about creation, why
That's
do I
huge
trust?
right there.
Right.
I just grabbed a piece of that, and I
man.
really liked it. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, I mean, because the Bible speaks Hebrews 1:1, in many ways and in many times the Lord spoke. God doesn't just like full send the message and then, hey, hope you get it. Like, he talks and he meets us where we're at, and he meets us in every part of us, and he meets us in different ways through human history as well. Even there is one message, again, you don't want to go too far on this. You don't want to become fully liberalized in your interpretation of these things where it's kind of an everything goes and it's really just what you feel. Like, no. Okay. But he does decline to us. He does bend down to us, and he speaks in a way that we understand. And sometimes what we need is not an answer. Sometimes we need a story. One more example, and I'll let you kind of push where you want to go here. One of my favorite examples is King David. Love King David because it's just like I think it all happened, first of all, but it's also a good story because he's a shepherd boy. He kills Goliath. He becomes king, and things are going pretty well. And then he starts getting corrupted because things are going pretty well, and he sees homegirl Bathsheba up on the roof, and you know how it ends. And he kills her husband, and he essentially rapes her. It's a horrible, horrible situation. And he's sitting on his throne one day, feeling okay about himself, and the prophet comes in, Nathan. And Nathan comes up to the king and goes, hey, King David, what would you do if you heard a man in your kingdom who, went into I'm not going to say the story perfectly, but went into someone's house and stole all their stuff and killed the man and spit on his corpse and walked away. That's not exactly what he says, but that's the idea. Okay. And David goes, I would catch that guy and I would execute him publicly because he's a scoundrel. And David's right, And Nathan just looks at him and goes, you're the man. Like, that's you.
Damn.
It's heavy, right? It's heavy. But what did Nathan do? Nathan told him a story that was the truth. And so C.S. Lewis has this phrase about Christianity. He calls it the myth that became true. And in a time like today, where there's a lot of myths out there that are not true, it's important to differentiate the stories, the narratives, the claims we make that are true from the ones that aren't true. And again, to bring it back to him, I think Jordan Peterson does this very, very well. And that's why he captures people's attention, because he speaks to that side. Whereas a lot of us grow up and it's all like, don't worry about none of that. It's all facts and data. And that doesn't speak to your heart, man. Like, that only speaks to the mind, and we're more than just that. So,
agreed. So, what about? I don't think you answered me about the dinosaurs. So, are we before? I mean, did we live among the dinosaurs as cavemen? Did they come before us? What is your thoughts on those?
So this is a boring answer, but I don't know this super well. I basically just take the default, what I assume to be the default opinion is that there was. And this gets sticky, right? But there was a kind of human evolution.
I like getting a little sticky with the conversation, just to throw some thoughts out there. Go ahead.
I think there was some kind of human evolution. There were, Homo neanderthalis and previous forms of Homo erectus.
So you think we were some type of monkeys?
Well, so no. So that's I was gonna say. We've talked about this. It's funny. I heard a story once about a professor, a Christian professor, who was talking to a bunch of young Earth creationist people. And they said what she said. You think that we all came from a bunch of monkeys. Okay. It's like, no, that's not what evolution teaches. Evolution teaches that humans and apes have a common ancestor.
Understood.
And that's different.
But how do you match that to Adam and Eve?
Well, let me finish the story.
Go ahead.
He later goes to an atheist group.
Okay.
A pro-evolution group. And he starts teaching them about evolution, but from a Christian perspective. And they came up to him and they say, why aren't you teaching that humans came from monkeys? And the idea here, the joke is that they didn't understand what it is either. And so evolution is not taught very well anymore. And first of all, Darwinian evolution and what current, natural selection evolution is are not the same thing. Darwin kind of got the ball rolling, but what scientists agree generally on now is not Darwinian evolution. It's something that is developed from that because Darwin made mistakes. So what do I believe about Adam and Eve? They're real historical people. Were they the first two humans who ever existed on the planet ever? And did they populate the human race through incest? Maybe. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Do I think that that's the best explanation? No. I would prefer, that God used the processes of evolution, and that at some point, it's interesting when we look at the archaeological record, when we look at the history of humanity, history really only starts about 6,000 years ago, which is ironic, right? Because that's when allegedly young earth people, that the earth was created. So to me, the way that I reconcile it is that I think that thing that makes us, that image of God, maybe like Homo neanderthalis and Homo erectus and the early Homo sapiens didn't have that. Sorry, I did it again.
You're okay.
Didn't have that thing. And then God created Adam and Eve at one point in that process, and that's when the image of God started. Now, I don't know if that's
if we could talk a little bit, because you seem to be very knowledgeable in the evolution stuff. So, because I can't deal with the evolution stuff, because I can understand that we can go from evolution, for example, from being extremely hairy to having less hair. Right. I can understand that. Mm-hmm. I can understand that maybe, I don't know, by living in the sun longer, our skin got darker. I don't know. For example, like I can understand certain things like that. I can't understand how do we go from a cell or a clump of cells to possibly taking into a human form and having babies through that until we are at the right form, or like how do we go from nothing to something in an evolution type of idea?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or how do they explain that? I would ask, I guess.
So if by evolution you mean going from nothing to something, I reject that idea too.
Okay.
So for sure, that's where I think a lot of people get kind of rightly nervous about these conversations, because what evolution means in most people's mind is going from nothing to something.
Right.
But a theistic evolution doesn't believe that you went from nothing to something.
So then that means that something was already created. In this case, God created.
Out of nothing.
Right.
Through his word, right.
So maybe God created, the way that I'm seeing it based on your conversation, because, I like to put things together in my own head. I don't know. So let's say God created Adam and Eve. Mm-hmm. And, well, the Bible doesn't explain it like that way, right?
It explains
it feels like Adam and Eve were in human forms, or is that that what they teach us as in?
There is no biblical evidence that talks about a move from Adam and Eve to like biologically what humans are today, except for the lifespan issue. The lifespan is the only thing that changes as far as I know.
Right, which was up to like 1,000 years.
Right. It was starting around 800, 900, 1,000 years. And then eventually through the storyline, because of the sinfulness of humanity, actually, God limits the lifespan to humans. He in the text, it says they will not live more than 120 years. Now, we could come back to this maybe later, because this is one of those parts where a poetic language, because we know people have lived past 120. So does that mean the Bible's false? Yeah. No, it doesn't. It just means that word 120 is not like an engineering manual. It's about saying that there are limits.
Right.
It's speaking poetically. And so that's why I think there's space for this. Ultimately, with the evolution question, I'm much less committed to defending theistic evolution or committed to defending young earth or old earth or any of these particular positions. There are people far smarter than me that know what's up. What I want to do is I want to create space for people to be able to talk about them.
Yeah.
To be able to wrestle with them and say, what do we believe? How do we know what we know, right? And so, what I would say is that the only possible evolution that a Christian could believe, and even then that doesn't mean that this is right, is that if God is the first and final cause of like the Big Bang, however many millions of years ago, and that he ordained these naturalistic processes such as fit to environment, such as adaptation over time, these sorts of evolutionary principles. He created them, he used them, he set his authority over them, and he constantly maintained them and sustained them, is the Christian word that you should use, over time, such that we have resulted in the current biological situation we have today. Now that doesn't mean that there's no problems though.
Right.
And that's what I would want to say too. As someone who leans in this direction, I have plenty of unexplained things. Like I don't think you can have a world that is purely survival of the fittest if you're a Christian. Because we worship a God who, died on the cross, and that was considered a victory. And survival of the fittest says that was a loss. But at the center of our faith is a guy who dies, lets his enemies kill him, and that's a victory. Like that breaks survival of the fittest. Furthermore, I do think that there are reasonable questions you should be asking about the age of the earth. We should be skeptical of the way that corporations and media are interested in changing people's opinions using science. You know, I want us to have a reasonable, healthy skepticism for the institutions of the universities right now who are pushing this stuff, because we know they believe other stuff. You know what I mean? We know that they have agendas in other areas. And so I'm not saying, you know, be completely unquestioning, but
have you ever asked ChatGPT how old the earth is?
What does it say?
Have you ever asked it?
No.
Me either.
I'm curious.
Let's find out here together.
You want to talk about biases? You can go ask ChatGPT something.
How old is the earth? How old is the earth? The earth is approximately 4.54 billion years old. This estimate is based on evidence from radiometric age dating of meteorite materials and earth rocks, as well as lunar samples. Okay.
And so that's a great example, right? So does the Bible talk about radiometric what in earth? Radiometric age dating of meteorite material?
Of course not. Those are names that we put into things.
So I would say is the Christian faith does not stand or fall on the radiometric dating of meteorites. And if it does, you're probably worshiping the wrong thing. You know what I mean? If God is, again, that type of being, that thing beyond which there's nothing greater than we can ever imagine, then the age of some rocks does not give you even something that approaches an answer to the question, is there a God or not? That it's important. Yeah. You should think about that, and you should think about it for a long time probably. But is that what Christian faith stands or falls on? No, definitely not.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so I know I've been flighty about it. But
So then in your opinion, we were definitely around the dinosaurs?
No, I don't think, as far as I know, again, I'm not a naturalist. I think the dinosaurs came first. I believe, I wish I could Google it right now, but I think the earliest early hominids are only a couple 100 million years old, and that's right at the end of the dinosaurs. So the earliest upright bipedal hominids would have lived during the time of like saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths and stuff. Now, are woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers dinosaurs? Like, well, they don't exist anymore, but they're not like scaly reptiles. So
they were around the Ice Age, right? Or...
Yeah, and so, yeah, absolutely. There was one of...
So maybe they were, but in different parts of the world?
Well, and what's interesting is, you know, you want to bring the Bible into it. People have wrestled with this. There are parts of the Bible that mention the Leviathan or the Behemoth as these, like, apparently dinosaur-like creatures, one of them in the sea, one of them on land, that are just... They're legendary. They're mythical, almost. And the Bible talks about them as if, you know, people that back then knew what they were. Today, we're like, what is that thing? What is that? Yeah. But here's what's interesting is that this is why, again, I want to create space for this conversation instead of necessarily just like jumping on one answer and saying it can only be this one thing. Someone like St. Augustine, who is one of the most important Christian thinkers, he's one of the earliest thinkers we got that thought long and hard about politics and Christianity. I mean, I love him. He wrote a book called The Confessions, where it was the first autobiography, where we had autobiographies before Augustine, but they weren't really by the person revealing like their innermost parts, and they definitely weren't talking about anything bad that they did. Yeah. Roman autobiography was like crap, basically. It was all like propaganda, essentially. But Augustine's writing about like the time that he sinned and the time that he did something horrible. Augustine reads the passage about the Leviathan, and he says it's about Satan. It ain't about a beast at all for him. Okay. So like this is what I mean. Like
we'll read it and take different things from it.
Right. And what do you do with that? What do you do with the fact that Christians have said different things about it? Well, sure, yeah, you can come down on one position, and yeah, maybe you should, but should you stake your faith on that, or whether or not you believe in God? Absolutely not. Yeah. The basics of Christianity are deeper than how old the earth is, or whether or not humans and apes have a mutual ancestor, or any of that, I think.
So in my case, I think, so I come to faith through both the miracle and also I realized that God had been talking to me my whole life. I just wasn't paying attention.
You sound like Augustine. That's what he says.
That's what he said?
He-
Okay.
yeah. He has this phrase. He says, "Late have I loved thee," and where the idea God was always there, loving him, but he never returned that love. Go
I
ahead.
used to think that everything I thought or did was if I want it, go get it. If it's
Yeah.
my desires or pleasures, why not? Like that, I would even say things like, well, if God created me, this is the way I am. Like, why?
Right. Everything's great.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
why not, just pursue what I want
Right.
so there's so many things, like, for example, not trusting your own heart at times. Man, there's some, fights that you can get into with your wife where you're like, did I really mean that? After you say certain things or as a man, just, growing up and just creating mistakes where you question yourself, like, wait a second, like, am I that person? Like, I thought I never would say things like that or create those situations.
Yeah.
And then you have impacts where you look at yourself and you're like,
Yeah.
and those answers are a lot of them in the Bible.
Well, I was just going to say, this is a great example of when I talked about Christianity having the most explanatory power out of any worldview. This is a great test case.
Yeah.
So say put on your materialist hat. You believe you're a pure Darwinian evolutionist. You don't believe in God at all. It's all just accident. You evolved from primal space goo eventually to today. There's no meaning in the world. There's no nothing. Why did you do that in that fight with your wife? What's the answer that worldview can give you? It's not great. It's like, well, maybe you're like a self-interested person, and at the time you're trying to make sure that your chances for survival are increased in the situation by not telling her the truth because you know that there will be negative reproductive consequences.
Yeah. Reproductive consequences.
You feel me?
Very well said.
You know what I mean?
Very well said. Yes.
Fine. Okay, sure. Does that explain something? Yes. But why does that leave that is that really why I did that?
It's the same as asking why do we desire to do good versus doing
exactly.
evil?
And so again, what does the scripture say about this? Well, the Bible says that we have these two principles inside of us that, Paul talks about, I do what I hate. That when I sin, it's not me, it's sin in me, bringing me to this point where I'm acting in such a way as I'm looking at myself saying, that thing is not me and it should not be there. And there's that sense of just ultimately, I think what you have to give up if you give up Christianity is you have to give up good and evil. You cannot say that there's good and evil in the world. I think that without Christianity, I don't think if you're being consistent, I'm not saying that there aren't moral atheists. There are definitely atheists who are more moral than Christians.
I agree,
at times,
100%.
and you've seen the corruption in the church. We're not saying you don't need God for morality. I'm saying if you follow the worldview consistently to its end, if you have a world that comes from nothing and goes to nothing, in the meantime, sure, you can go Albert Camus and be like, yeah, it's, we make meaning, or, it's what we find and discover and create ourselves. This is what the transgender movement is based on, this idea of creating meaning. It's just an act, it's a performance, but it feels good and it means something and we can get people to do what we want. So let's play the part. Man, that's so cynical, right? Like, everyone grew up, and as a kid, you knew, that prince, he rescues the princess from the dragon, and the dragon was bad, and the princess needed rescuing, and the prince was a good guy. And that's so baked into us.
Yeah.
And I think that in terms of, again, worldview explanatory power, why did you say that in that fight to your wife? Because you're a sinner, man. And that's the best explanation. And what's nice is that Christianity don't leave you there. It says the gospel too. It says, hey, there was a man named Jesus and he was God.
Yeah.
And he took that on himself and he freed you from that because you don't have to live in that anymore. And you're heading to a place where that's not going to be the thing anymore. Now it moves pretty quickly, of course, through the whole gamut. But again, it accounts for these basic phenomena that we experience in our days, stresses, failures, excitements, fears, those sorts of things. I think in a way that's better than other worldviews.
Yeah. Well said, man. All right. So I would say, well, man, like you gave me some good stuff there. I like that. Okay, so I do have a question that I wrote down as you were talking. So you seem to be a kid that walked away from faith at a certain point in your life, and I want to make sure that as a parent, I don't make maybe the same mistakes that your parents made, or a lot of parents make, where they maybe push Christianity too much into their kids, or I'm concerned with becoming what my mom was, for
Yeah.
example, or my dad never, he was more of a Santa Barbara type of person, but my mom, for example, just consistently just pushing me to go to church.
Yeah.
And I go to church, and it's not like our church where they take care of the kids. It's more like, I'm hanging out with all these buffoons, and then I'm watching cartoon Jesus, and I'm like, I hate this. Like,
Yeah.
I should be playing with my friends outside or something. So it created like this little hate of, like you said, no freedom or whatever. As parents, how can we prevent, like, how can we teach the word to our kids in a way where they could use it, in their lives, and especially when they become teenagers? How do we assure ourselves that we don't create separation between ourselves and them and their mind and their relationship to God?
Yeah,
What are your thoughts on that?
This is a great question. First thing I would say is, like, I have a great relationship with my parents now, and a lot of what went wrong was my fault.
Right.
In fact, again, explanatory power. What does the Bible say about a kid who rebels from their parents? Sometimes it's the parent, but sometimes it's the kid.
Yeah. Agreed.
And so parents, I think, first and foremost, I'm a parent myself. My kids are 3 and 1, so but man, my 3-year-old sins. It's crazy. You see her get angry and smack the other boy on his face. He's one, like, why? Over your little doll? Like, if that's not sin, I don't know what is.
Right.
But anyway, I would say the first thing, you got to give yourself grace. You got to realize that your job as a parent is not to save them. That's Jesus's job. Your job as a parent is to be intoxicating with the love of Jesus and the joy of Jesus. Your job as a parent is to love Jesus with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And I think that if lifestyles of Christians, adults in my life, were not attractive in the sense of that they were relevant in some cheap sense, or that they like tried to speak my language as a kid. No, but I saw people who were growing in their faith, who are asking questions like you are, you know what I mean? Who don't have all the answers, and who don't boil it all down to a moral system. That's, I think, the greatest danger. When Jesus when you go reading the Gospels, why did Jesus and the Pharisees have so much conflict? It's because the Pharisees thought that if you just kept the rules, you got it, and we're gonna get that world. We're gonna get rid of the Romans, and we're gonna see the Jewish state come back, and the king's gonna be on the throne, and everything's gonna be okay if we just keep all the rules. And Jesus came and said, like, you can't keep the rules.
Right.
It's not up to you. I want to give you this for free if you would just take it. But they said, no, we got to keep the rules. And so parents can't do that either.
Can I ask you a question just on that, and you can continue? So, as do Jews still follow that mindset till today? Is that their mindset still, or have their religion changed after Jesus?
Oh, it changed.
Okay.
Yeah. So immediately after Jesus, a movement, almost immediately, within a few hundred years, a movement called Rabbinic Judaism ascended because of the temple was destroyed. And so Jewish religion in the first century was centered around a physical location in Jerusalem, currently the Dome of the Rock, called the temple. When that was destroyed, the sacrificial system was abolished, and the Jewish religion was based on the sacrificial system. And if there's no sacrifices, there's no Jewish religion. And so something had to change. There was also 70 years, or excuse me, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 50 years before that, 30 years before that or so, this guy named Jesus, who claimed to be the Messiah and who started this movement of people called Christians who claimed to be the real Israel and the real Jews.
Yeah.
And they had to wrestle with that too. So Rabbinic Judaism was like the first answer to that. It was a much more pastoral form of Judaism. It was wrestling with the idea that there was, something that happened to the Jewish people and that they lost the temple. And then from there, Judaism has gone I mean, you have esoteric Judaism like Kabbalah and stuff. Really,
Okay, so
really
there's
weird stuff.
different type of.
There's
Okay.
secular Judaism, which doesn't believe in God at all. It's just like an ethnic system, you know?
What?
Yeah. There's
Okay.
secular Jews. There are liberal Jews.
All right. Well, I didn't
yeah,
mean to take you
all
off.
over,
Did you
man.
finish explaining the parenting part, or
No. So I said,
Okay.
give yourself grace first.
right?
Okay. And then be intoxicating. Be an intoxicating presence. That requires
Set the example. Make sure that you're applying Jesus in your life.
Yeah, and,
Right.
and what I would say is like, ask yourself this question: like, are you in love with Jesus? Like, do you go home, and the first thing you think about is flipping on the TV to like go to your favorite show or your favorite sport, or like take account of your life and ask if my kid looked at my life, and someone asked them that question: what does Daddy love? What does Daddy love most? What does Mommy love most? Is your kid gonna say Jesus? And that, I'm not saying you need to prove it by a bunch of works. See, this is where this gets sticky.
I understand what you mean.
But you catch that vision, you know, where like, are you the kind of person where it just kind of flows out of you naturally?
Yeah.
You know, you're that kind of person who sees it everywhere. C.S. Lewis, again, another quote by him that I really like is, he goes, I don't believe in Christianity as much as I believe in the sun, in that the sun exists or not. But I believe Christianity because by the light of it, just like the light of the sun, I see everything else. You know, I see everything else by this light that comes out of Jesus for him. And it, again, it's the worldview that explains everything. And so, you know, can you show that? And so practically, what does that mean? I would recommend a book by a guy named Roger Erdvig. He's a part of a ministry called Summit Ministries. It's called Beyond Biblical Integration. And so there was this movement. I'm an educator. There was this movement in Christian education in the past 30 or 40 years that said, what we need to do is we need to have devotions in class, 10 commandments on the wall, life verses, and we need to integrate the Bible into our curriculum. We need to show how, when you're studying geometry, it's just like this verse in the Bible. And that's good. That was a good first step. But what people need more than just it's kind of stuck into activities is they need to be immersed in it. They need to be growing their worldviews. They need to be wrestling with questions that come up. They need to be authentic and available for questions as, you struggle with something as an adult, so that your kids can see that it's okay to not have all the answers, that when they turn 21, they're not just perfect people.
Right.
Because they think that. I mean, my high schoolers think that when they turn 18, they're perfect people. And you and I both know that that ain't how it works.
No, that's not it.
Yeah. So catch that vision. Yeah.
My wife said Godzilla is in Job.
Godzilla is in Job.
Job. Sorry,
Job,
I didn't say it wrong.
No, it's all right. Yeah, that's that Leviathan text. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's hilarious.
I absolutely think that could be I know we're all over the place, but I love it. This is why I love these. This is what I mean, though. Like what the conversation we're having right now. Listen to what we talked about already.
Yeah.
You know, we've talked about 30 different things. Well, that might be because we're scatterbrained.
Yeah.
But it's also because everything relates to Jesus, man.
Yeah.
And there is no place that we're on a real estate podcast. I promise you, a Christian in real estate is going to find connections where someone who just thinks it's their job is not going to. I know you know
I
that.
do all the time. All the time. There's so much joy, there's pain, there's stress.
Yep.
I tell you, doing it alone, which I started probably doing it alone, and I found Jesus along the way. It's just brought a lot of, I don't want to say full peace, because there's no such thing, right? You still battle with things, but I don't feel alone, at least. Yeah. And I know that a lot of realtors can relate to this as well. And also the part where, the money, right? The money can eat you a little bit. I'd spend probably my whole first year as a realtor. As soon as I got my first paycheck and I figured it out, I'm like, oh man, like I'm just gonna blow this up.
Let's rock, yeah.
Yeah, so I spend, so much time away from my family, so much time away from my wife, and it created problems in different areas. And while I'm thinking that I'm, making all this money and being successful, and money is all that matters, the nice car and this and that, and all of a sudden I found myself, with even more stress than I had when I was, less wealthy. Yeah. And, a lot of questions come to mind in those situations and stuff too. So, okay. So, I wanted to ask about, so have you ever heard about drugs connecting you to God. What is your take on that?
Yeah.
For example, in the Joe Rogan podcast, they talk about shrooms and how they, connect you to God. Like, what is your take on that? Do you think that's nonsense, craziness, or do you feel like in some type of way people get to a certain level? Like, I mean, there's a fungi study that talked about people that were suicidal that literally had a conversation with God and didn't, want to commit suicide anymore. Like, I'm not trying to make a funny point here.
No,
I'm
no,
very
for sure.
it's a serious question.
So this, I'm gonna use a big word. This is called an entheogenic. I don't know if Rogan uses this word, but in studies, in religious studies, there's a background. There's a sub-discipline of religious studies, academic religious studies, that studies entheogenics, which is basically using drugs to have spiritual experiences. And there's a very famous experiment called the Harvard Divinity School experiment. I believe it's called the Harvard Divinity School experiment. I think it took place, I want to say in the 60s or the 70s, but I'm not positive on that, where a Harvard Divinity School professor was experimenting with LSD. Him and his divinity students locked themselves in a cathedral for a week and took microdosed LSD and sometimes megadosed LSD.
Him and his students?
Him and his students.
Was he trying to create a party
He was testing whether or not entheogenics can give you a spiritual
Did the
experience.
students knew that he was testing?
Yep, it was all consensual. There was no funny business here,
All right,
for sure.
go ahead. It sounds like a party when you're
well-
it's like, okay, let's all take some drugs here and see what happens.
I mean, so it's good that you point that out, because where I'm going with this eventually, I think that's what we have to wrestle with if we're going to think about this rationally. But 9 out of 10 students in that experience said it was they definitely met God, and it was the most life-changing experience of their lives. I have friends actually who are really into New Age stuff, like Ram Dass. Ram Dass was a figure who advocated in the 60s for entheogenics, microdosing LSD or DMT. DMT is really big among people who are into this stuff. What do I believe about it? Just to state my position, I believe it's dangerous.
Okay.
And extremely dangerous. I believe that it is magic. I believe that it's sorcery. So here's why I believe that's sorcery. So the Bible talks about sorcerers not inheriting the kingdom of God. And I love when these verses come up. Because
not inheriting the kingdom of God.
Right.
What does that mean? Like they won't get there?
Okay. We can roll with that for now.
Okay.
It would take us on a diversion, but basically being cut off from the state of blessedness that comes with taking Jesus's acceptance, his offer of grace, and entering the people of God. It's where you want to be.
Okay.
All right. What is sorcery to a person living in 2024? You know what I mean? Well, we know that there are people.
Brujeria?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
That we know Wicca, we know Santeria, right?
Yeah.
We know stuff like that. So it exists for sure. But do only people who believe that struggle with sorcery? So here's where I think modern, Western, more affluent people who are, or not as, I don't know if it's necessarily affluent, but I know a lot of white folk who are into this stuff.
Okay.
Business class, white collar people. It's big in Silicon Valley, we know, you know? And so why are they entranced by this? Why is it magic? Because both magic and entheogenics function in the same basic way. They both say, you do this technique, you ingest this substance, you do this thing, and the transaction is that you have an experience with God. All right? It's this tit for tat. It's this trade. It's this, if you put yourself in this perfect state of mind through chemical alteration, then you have access to this sort of secret realm that you weren't able to have access to previously. And that's how magic functions. So a little bit about me as a background. Before I was a Christian, I practiced paganism. I practiced magic. I practiced Wicca.
Can you explain what just a short explanation of what that is?
Super short. Basically, I believed that the nature was a god or a goddess, both actually in that case. I believe that there was a god and a goddess, and that everything in nature had like a spiritual being behind it. So like there was a god of the table, a god of the tree, a god of the rock, pantheism, that everything was little gods and goddesses essentially, and that there was a spiritual realm behind the visual realm, and that they responded to magic. And depending on what pagan you ask, they'll give you a different answer to this. But some pagans say that when you trade something like in a ritual, magic ritual to a god for something, they'll give you a blessing. And then other people who practice more intense forms of magic believe that there are rituals out there that you can compel or like enslave a deity to do what you want. This is how, for instance, some forms of Norse paganism worked, is that, or as well as Egyptian paganism, is that we could do the proper magical ritual, and we'd in for a few moments control this spiritual being, and it would do what we want. How is that like entheogenics, microdosing LSD, or taking DMT to have a spiritual experience? Again, if I take this thing, I'm going to be able to go past the wall, and I'm going to have this interaction on my terms, when I want to have it, in the way I want to have it, and I hold it in the palm of my hand. This idea of that, where's the door to spiritual experience? It's on this tab of acid. Man, that's dangerous, because that tab of acid 2,000 years ago was the athame. And athame is a pagan term for a knife used in ritual worship.
Wow.
And so in pagan religious worship today, in magic today, there are objects that are magical objects that if you do the right things with them, they get you to the spiritual realm. And I think that entheogenics are a kind of sorcery because of that.
Do you believe in that? Do you believe in the entities and stuff like that? Like, do you believe in possession?
So I absolutely believe that there are spiritual beings other than us and God. They're called angels and demons.
Okay.
I am pretty convinced that folks who are doing entheogenics are communing with demons. In fact, Christianity, again, has an explanation for everything, and we believe that demons, who are spiritual beings who have in some time in the past, so we don't know, we've talked about this, but they've rebelled from God, and they've cut themselves off from the source of life, their own creator, and they now live solely in a negative posture to God. They seek to bring back to chaos what God has risen up to order. They want to break and tear down where God builds and encourages. And so they're just not the negative principle, because they're not equal to God. They're completely under God's sovereignty, and that's a whole nother question. But they are there, and they're out there, and they want people dead, and they want people miserable, and they want people stuck in their sin forever.
Why?
Because they hate God. I mean, that should be the least surprising, I think, thing out of all of this, is that there are beings who hate God. You know, of course there are.
Yeah, that's not surprising. It's just, I'm like, why would what is there in death that they want? Like that a dead baby, for example, like that. Okay, that sounds so satanic.
Yeah.
Why does the devil enjoy that? Because of the suffering that he creates, because it separates people from God?
I think the way to understand the devil and the demonic best is that the devil and the demonic doesn't want like death or non-existence. It wants to be God. It wants the reality on its own terms. And why is it so shocking to us? Why does it want such extreme things, such horrifying things? Because unlike us, the devil and the demonic have seen God, and they know what it means to rebel. They know that it doesn't just mean, oh, I'm going to go live my own life, and it's going to be a white picket fence, and I'm going to do me, and it's going to be fine. They know that if you're going to rebel against the source of all existence itself, that means living for non-existence, living for chaos, living for everything God is not. Well, if God is infinite goodness, infinite knowledge, infinite purity, infinite all the good qualities, right? Well, then that means living for infinite negation of those things. And so they're evil and they're consistent. That's why you end up with sort of horrifying things.
How do I separate? And let me know if I'm wrong, because again, I'm new to the Bible. I probably read maybe 5 to 7% of it, I would say. I'm very impressed with where I've gotten so far, because it's teachings and everything. I'm very curious about the area about, heaven and hell and how that area works a little bit. I do feel like sometimes pastors that I've seen talk about it in a way like, if you do that, you go to hell. And I hate that a little bit. Like I feel like pastors should be very careful when they talk to people about, doing this will put you in hell, because it is, I don't know, there's something in there where it makes me question, like, how do you know? Like, how do you know that God won't forgive me? Or like, like it's really like,
Yeah.
It's a gray area for me
Yeah.
to hear people like tell me where I'm gonna go,
Yeah.
or tell anybody, society, where they're
sure.
gonna go based on their decisions.
Yeah.
So my question is, so the Bible talks about death as it being something that you actually die. You don't go to the kingdom of heaven. Like Jesus says that you will find eternal life through me, right? Meaning that even if after you die
Yeah.
in the human form, you will still have life
Yeah.
after death. How do you separate those two? When the Bible says, or when Jesus says death, does he mean hell, or does he mean just dead, like you don't exist at all?
That's a great question.
What do you think? Obviously, because
Yeah. So I'm going to tell the story. I'm going to answer that question by telling you the story of the Bible.
just like we started at the beginning. I understand.
Because everything is about the story of the Bible. And so Christians believe that in the beginning, there was humans place that they were living was in the presence of God in a garden on a high mountain. It was in the land of Eden, and there was a garden inside of the land called Eden. The garden wasn't called Eden, if you read closely.
I understand.
And that was a place where heaven, God's space, and earth, our space, completely overlapped.
Okay.
This is vital. Sin separated those spaces.
Okay.
So heaven, God's space, and the earth, our space, are now separate because of sin. And there was no way to get back over. Jesus came, and when he came, he said, the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, he would say, is here, has come among you. And what he was saying is that those two circles kind of came back together like a Venn diagram, not completely,
Right.
but a little bit. And Christians believe that when you accept Jesus into your heart, you hear this phrase all the time. We can unpack what that means. When you receive the Holy Spirit, when you've been sanctified by the Holy Spirit, and when you live as a Christian in the world, little pockets of heaven kind of break into the world. And we can get a taste of what it means to live back like we did in Eden, where the line between heaven and earth is overlapping again, but not perfectly, because that comes at the end. Only God is the one who fully brings things back together. It's not on our own power, and we're waiting the day when the new heavens and the new earth come back together, and that's the picture of the New Jerusalem. So now we have a garden city, and maybe we'll talk about cities. It's one of my favorite themes in the Bible, but now we have a garden city where God's space, heaven, and our space, earth, completely overlap again.
Okay.
So now the question is, well, where do you go when you die? Well, right now we're in the Venn diagram. Jesus has come. There is overlap. It's for people who accept Christ, and it's for the space around them, not just the physical space, but the heart space as well. And so when you die, there's a lot of emphasis on this idea that you jump from the circle of the earth into the circle of heaven, right? You leave the earth and you go to heaven. And the Bible actually doesn't talk a lot about where you go when you die. One of the few things it says is that the dead are alive in Christ. And so we know that the dead don't just annihilate. We know that there's an afterlife, and we know that those who are Christians and die are with Christ. Now, we know Christ is at the right hand of God, and that God's space is called heaven, so I don't think that there's anything wrong with Christians saying that people who die and are saved go to heaven. But the point is not to miss the very important, I think, main idea of Christianity is that Christianity is not about going to heaven. Heaven is like a bonus, sort of. But the point of Christianity is that heaven and earth, we're heading to a place where they fully overlap again, just like they did in the Garden of Eden. And God's space and our space is completely shared in a way that is safe and is what God has always intended. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I understand. I'm understanding. Do you think that does the Bible say anything about heaven overpopulating?
Yeah, so no, that's a pretty basic category error. So God's space is not physical space. Physical space is limited, right?
Right.
There's only so much space in this room. There's this thing called volume. We can measure the internal capacity of space. But since God's space is spiritual in nature, it doesn't have volume. It doesn't have space. Space is more like an analogy that we use to talk about God's space. It's not physical in nature. So the idea that heaven is overpopulated implies that there's some limit to goodness, and God is infinitely good. There can't be limits to goodness. We believe in God. So yeah, no sense of overpopulation or underpopulation. Those are very, very kind of worldly images, I think, that come more from people like John Milton or Greek mythology than from the biblical text itself. Again, the Bible doesn't talk a lot about what heaven looks like.
Yeah.
It talks about that New Jerusalem coming down when heaven and earth are going to overlap completely again, and God is going to dwell with his people.
So, okay, I think that concludes most of my Bible questions and stuff like that. Guys, I hope you got a lot of knowledge from this. We got Anthony here. Again, please share if you're connected in the live. If you have any questions, please go ahead and put it in the comments. I want to say hi to my wife that's watching right now, JG, and anybody else that is connected as well. Saying hi to you guys. All right, great conversation so far. We're an hour in a few minutes, an hour and 10 minutes. Let's get into a little bit of politics.
Yeah, baby.
Good with that? Okay. So in today's world, we have a situation right now between Mrs. Harris and Trump. So, okay, do you sit on one side of this yourself? How do you see today's politics?
Yeah, so let me give like a really, really quick background. Again, I'm sorry to keep doing this to you.
Yeah,
but,
go ahead.
I have academic training in philosophy and history and theology, and one of the main places that I have training is in political philosophy. So
Okay.
I have been doing academic work in political philosophy. I'm actually currently working on a paper on it's going to be on epistemically hostile environments with a friend of mine. He got the contract to this, and he's being very graciously allowing me to co-write with him. His name's Mike, you know him, and it's a really
Mike.
relevant portion. So I would just say, like,
Mike is great. I want to have him here too. He's the other person I've been
we
thinking
should get
about
all three
too.
of us here. That
would be great.
That would be fun because Mike's
Okay.
awesome. He's taught me a lot. So yeah, a little bit of background about me politically. Again, growing up not Christian, I was very active in the Bernie Sanders campaign. In 2012, I was volunteering for the campaign. I had just become a Christian at this time, and I was still very, very taken by, I think, a lot of my old ways of thinking. I don't think I would support Bernie Sanders today.
Okay.
Before that, when I was not a Christian at all and I couldn't even vote,
I used to like Bernie Sanders too.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There are some parts of him that are, I think, good.
Yeah.
Before that, when I was not even old enough to vote, I would have said I supported Obama, but I didn't have any real reasons for that.
Okay.
I was more reacting against conservative politics, which I saw as being that Christian side, and I didn't like any of that, and so I didn't want anything to do with it. Now today, I have not voted in a presidential election since 2012.
Okay.
And the reason for that might come out as we talk about this, but I have worried that the choice being offered to people, the best answer to the choice is to say no to the choice, and is to say, you know what, I'm just going to pick another form of political life and participate in that instead. And so we can get into that a little bit. But yeah.
Please elaborate on that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the basic logic.
How do
is
you
simple.
not make a choice? Let's start there.
Well, so I definitely don't think I'm not making a choice. I'm choosing another option. So people often talk about voting like this. You have a choice between the Republican candidate, you have the choice between the Democratic candidate, and you have a choice to throw away your vote, which is not really a choice.
Okay.
I would say, yeah, people can throw away their vote, or people can principally, I can't even say that word, principally, withhold their choice from any of those things and say, you know what, if what's being offered to me is two bad things, you always hear about this lesser evil, I'm going to vote for the lesser evil. Sometimes I don't know if we think about what we're saying when we say that. A lesser evil is still evil.
Right.
And if you're saying that things are working well when I'm supposed to vote for evil, even if it's lesser evil, I would just want to say, hey, maybe we should take a step back and at least think about what's going on. Now, I will say this right now in terms of the 2024 election. I don't know if I know any others, but I'm actually one of the rare undecided voters. I am currently thinking about if I'm going to vote this election because I do think that what's at stake in the current political discourse is not just a decision between like Kamala Harris and the Democrats and Donald Trump and the Republicans, but it is two different views of civilization.
Right.
And so I think there are a lot of people who don't vote, who are of my generation, who want to de-emphasize how messed up stuff is right now and how much danger there is. I don't want to be one of those people at all. It is very dangerous right now in terms of the decisions we make as a country. So I'm undecided, honestly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I pour into you a little bit?
But dude, yeah.
Okay, so I'm from Cuba.
Yeah.
I come from communism. I absolutely hate. I don't hate many things, but I hate communism.
As you
I
said.
hate communism ideas. They've taken everything from me, including my land. I feel like I was taken out of my culture and like my love.
Your home.
Yeah, and put into a different place, which I love the United States of America.
Yeah.
My favorite thing about the United States is freedom. This flag that we have back here, it means the world to me, and it hurts me to see some of the things that I see today, where they're burning you know, the flag. Like, I can't see anybody do that in front of me. Like, I might get arrested for that.
Supporting people who would want to come and do harm.
Right, right. So I am, in my eyes, and in a lot of Cubans' eyes, Trump is the right candidate. And here are the reasons why. And I would love to hear why you may feel different on any, you know, however you feel. Like it's just an open conversation, right?
Yeah.
So I see Trump as Jesus's choice, honestly. Like I see him as God's choice right now for this country. I see that, to me, is the policies that the left is pushing with the transgender movements, the LGBT agenda. Where, I mean, the other day I had to have a conversation, you know, with my son about LGBTQ. Yeah. I'm sorry, but I don't want to have that conversation. Right. I don't think that I need to have that conversation with a 9-year-old.
Right. It's a tragedy.
And it started when he was 6 years old.
Right.
Watching an anime cartoon on Netflix that was in the kids section. You know, me and my wife were very good about, you know, making sure that we pay attention to what the kids watch.
But it's everywhere. Yeah.
Right. So I sat down with him. I'm looking at a show, and the first 3 episodes we saw together, like, great storytelling. Everything was amazing. On season 2 of episode 9, I guess, you know, one of the characters asked the other, you know, about to kind of like start a relationship, and the character goes like, no, I don't like girls. I actually like boys. And all of a sudden, you know, ends up with another boy.
Now it's there.
And they're kissing. My son sees that at 6 years old, and he comes to me and asks me, hey, so boys kiss? And I'm, you know, faced with a situation that I never saw coming.
Which,
like,
you said no, of course, you know, and you taught him and you let him.
Yes,
right?
yes, but it worries me because let's say my son decides to, or my daughter, or anybody, like, I don't want to impose that I'm right. I don't necessarily want to do that. I like to make them think, right?
Yeah.
So in that moment, I acted in an impulsive way. I say, yeah, that's wrong. That's not okay, you know. But then I'm like, man, he's going to keep seeing stuff like that. Will he eventually maybe turn it into a situation of, man, my dad has taught me to hate these people, and I don't want to teach him that.
Right.
I don't want to teach him to hate anybody.
No, absolutely not.
But I do feel some type of hate about the fact that he saw that. Yeah. And it wasn't like something that, you know, I wasn't warned about it. Nobody gave me. Some
executive somewhere made a decision that's now.
Well, I would say politicals, politics, or people have passed laws that has allowed this, because in some other, you know, years ago, this would have been, you know, PG-13 at least, which I would have been more okay with.
Right.
You know, I think a teenager can understand those.
Warning.
Right. Versus a 6-year-old, you know, the brain is so young. Things can get damaged, right? So, all right. So, going back to why I think Trump is the right candidate. So, we have the policies that the left has pushed. I mean, from the wars. I hate wars. Trump brought peace to the world. Everybody said he was going to destroy the world. It was going to be World War III. I hated Trump when he first ran. I thought he was the devil. I thought he was really bad.
Yeah.
And I allow myself to be consumed by the news.
Yep.
Not only American news, but also the Spanish news. They were even worse.
I bet.
Univision, Telemundo, they were really bad. Oh, he's racist, and every clip they would show, it was him talking about we need to close the border, and they would grab words of his and make him look racist, but they weren't really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So then I would did my research after he won.
Yeah.
Things were going good. I do my research on him. I'm looking at all these full videos now. I'm looking at the whole thing. And then I start getting into politics. Like, wait a second, I've been lied to. So then I started getting angry at the fact that I hated somebody without even doing the research. I judged them instead of actually doing the research.
I can relate to that. That's where I came from a lot too, is recognizing that I drank the Kool-Aid, and the media is very good at hiring advertising and marketing executives and spinning, things to appeal to the basic impulses behind people. And so I recognize places where I, just assumed Trump was a racist monster because I was told to.
Right. So I saw that. I fall in love with Trump somewhere around 2017, 2018. I saw so much history on himself. Yeah, was he a perfect man? Absolutely not.
Sure.
But I agree with most of the things he said. I agree with putting America first. Like, let's fix my house before I tell you how to run yours, right? Sure. I'm not going to go into your house and tell you, hey, you got to cut the lawn or do this or do that. Like, when I should fix mine first before I can go out into the community and try to make an impact in the community.
And that's a biblical principle, right? Jesus talks about, hey, remove the log in your own eye before you pick out the speck in your brother's eye.
Right.
That's what makes sense.
I saw a lot of videos of him back in the 80s and the 90s talking about America in the same way
very well spoken.
He does today.
Yes.
So, people were putting words in his mouth about make America great. It's like, what, back to the slave days? No, make it back to the Ronald Reagan days. It's what he, is pushing. And then I saw the way that he treated Cuba and the communists, and the way that he talks to communists. And coming from a communist country, I know that these people don't play. Like, I know that if they see good, all they have to do is just shift it a little bit, and it creates chaos around it. So I see, pushes from the left, mostly extreme left, that I completely disagree with. For example, let's talk about, Bernie Sanders was, caught me big on the ecological, aspect, making the world a better place to live, making sure that, we don't destroy the world.
Sure.
And there's so much, good things there. But then you learn about nuclear power, and then you learn about a car that was made out of water. And then there's this guy in Argentina that made a car out of trash.
Yeah.
Have you seen that? He throws trash into the trunk.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I know exactly what
it
you're
burns
talking about.
it, and the car works. It's like,
and then you never hear about it ever again because no one ever funds these
they
things.
kill them or they disappear them,
exactly.
right? And then the story of Nikola Tesla, and you're like, whoa, like, okay, so we can't just pay attention to the news and pay. I mean, in Cuba we had 2 channels.
Yeah.
In Cuba they teach us that Che was like a god.
Yeah.
I'm over here like pionero por el comunismo, seremos como Che.
Sitting
like,
on
I'm
his
like,
motorcycle thinking about his life.
yeah, and then I come
the
to this
world.
country and they tell me he's a terrorist, and I'm like, what? What's going on here? So everything that the left has done so far as a father has affected me to a point where I'm trying to not hate.
Right.
And that's a big deal for me. I'm like, okay, that really pissed me off. How do I not, show anger towards that? And finding Jesus has taught me to, calm down, like pray on it.
Good, yeah.
Be slow to anger.
Yep.
Like so many good values instead of just lashing out like I probably would have, if it was 5 years ago and these things were still happening. So the situation with my son happened. Biden has, given wings to communism again. Obama gave wings to communism easily. The fact that Trump has said things to the Iranian president that, hey, we're going to be leaving the Iran. If you touch any of my soldiers, we will kill you. And gives him a picture, a letter that's the picture of his house, and walks away.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand that people can grab those things and say, "Oh, what kind of human can say stuff like that?" Well, we're dealing with terrorists.
What are we dealing with exactly?
Right? And the United States is a business.
Yeah.
It's a big, gigantic business. Just like this podcast is a business. It's a very small business compared to the United States. But the point is that if we're talking about peace in the world, we need somebody firm and hard up on the top. And I can see Trump playing the game of I have to show strength in certain areas that may make me look to some other people like I'm a tyrant.
Yeah.
But I can see that he's not. He's a family man. He's 80 years old. He could be retiring in an island right now. Why is this dude running for president, dude? Like, why would you even do that? He loves this country. He has shown it in his words. Are all his policies some that I agree with? I mean, the immigration one is a big one for me. I think, Argentina has open immigration. I think that there's a way to legalize a lot of the people that are coming in, but we have to first put up a wall and control who's coming in.
Sure.
We can't just, allow people to pour in, especially if they're coming from other countries. So
and the idea too that, multiculturalism, what we just need to do is we just need to get all these cultures and all these worldviews and all these backgrounds and all these histories and all these styles of life, and we're just going to put them all in the same place together. And what's going to come out is peace and loving, no, go look at Europe. Like, not at all. When you throw all these cultures and these competing worldviews together, what comes out is not peace and love and kumbaya. What comes out is people who worship strength and who are interested in taking over. They're going to position themselves to take over, and other people are going to get trampled. That absolutely happens. I definitely think that the question of what you mentioned, that's central to me, is what does it mean to have, show, and exercise power as a Christian? And that is also where I struggle the most with Trump, because, and this is why I'm undecided as well. Again, I'm open to this. I have a similar situation where I realized, dang, I was really letting my media consumption dictate my feelings and my thoughts about these things. But I also worry that there's a very good article that I, again, would recommend on First Things, which is a theological journal, a Christian journal, by a guy named N.S. Lyons. It's called Dark Enchantment.
Okay.
And it goes like this. We are a country that is founded on freedom, and freedom is a concept that comes from the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment was a time that is really hard to pin down in one word, but basically it's the idea that freedom from limits, big government, the feudal system, which is what they were reacting to at the time, the divine right of kings, what we need is democracy, and what we need is individual freedom and individual autonomy. And I don't want to be one of these people who says that those things are bad, because personal freedom and personal autonomy and the rights of human beings to, for instance, have a family and not have their family broken up based on what they believe necessarily. Yeah. Now, we can get into that, because I definitely think that there are some families that are not families that are going by the name of family right now. But, I want to keep those things about the Enlightenment. But the other thing I worry about the Enlightenment is that this is the water we swim in, is the Enlightenment said that the individual was first, that it's about number one, and it's about you, and it's about your freedoms and the personal sort of power and potential of the individual. And there's something right about that, and there's something wrong about that. And my fear with Trump, not saying that anything that you say about the left is wrong. I agree with everything you said about the left. I think the left in this country is walking down a path that is going to destroy itself. It will logically lead to its own destruction. But what I fear is that when we look at the left and we say, yeah, that's insane, because it is, the gender ideology and all that stuff. What we can do is we can do what Christians throughout all history have done, and they've turned to worship the same power, but with a different kind of like social ethic behind it. And so I'm a Baptist. What separates me from someone who's not a Baptist, I'm speaking generally here. I know a lot of people would not consider themselves like this, but historically, like the Reformed Christian traditions, they were okay with state churches. If you're born in Norway today, you were born and you pay taxes to the Church of Norway, even though Norway is is an atheistic country. There's barely any Christians in Norway, but you still have this state Church of Norway, or the Church of England, or the Church of Denmark, and all these places. That idea was a prior idea in Western civilization, the idea that the church and the state could go like this. and that the state could grease the rails for the gospel, and then the gospel would grease the rails for the state, and we would have this Christian civilization, Christian society, and the king and the priest and the pastor and the church, everything would be, and we would have a Christian civilization called Christendom. And that's what I think is not necessarily the case, because for the first 400 years of Christianity's existence, Christianity was illegal everywhere it lived, everywhere. And it was only, 300 years. It was only with the Edict of Milan in the year 311, when the Roman emperor at the time had a dream where he saw a banner. He was getting ready to fight a battle, and he saw a Chi Rho, an XP, it looks like in Latin letters. It stands for Christ, C-H-R-I-S-T in Greek. It says, by this banner you will conquer. And he had this dream, and shortly thereafter he legalized Christianity and then eventually made Christianity the state religion of the Roman Empire. Now, what happened in Christianity at that time? Suddenly it became cheap to become a Christian. Suddenly it became very easy to become a Christian, because previously to become a Christian cost you something. It cost you social status. It cost you a seat at the table in the halls of power. You did not serve as a judge. You did not get elected to political office because you were seen as an atheist in the Roman Empire. When the Edict of Milan came out and the Roman Empire Christianized, suddenly it was socially okay to be a Christian. And that's a good thing, I think. I think as Christians, we're supposed to go into the world and, like the book of Jeremiah says, work for the good of the city in which you are in exile. But that last part, in which you are in exile, oh boy, we're exiles, apparently, the Bible says, in our political systems. And that's what I really struggle with in terms of balancing that. Okay, I'm a citizen of America. I'm American. There are great threats out there from the left, from Islam, from radical Islam. I believe radical Islam is an incredible threat to the West.
Yeah.
From all kinds of ideologies out there, you know. But also, Christians don't have the luxury of just saying, okay, we're going to pick up the sword and go annihilate them.
Right.
Christians worship a God that apparently the way that he annihilated evil was to let it kill him for 3 days and then rise and then initiate this thing called the church. And then one day there will be a final defeat of evil, but it's not really clear about where our role in that is. And meanwhile, we're supposed to work for the good of the city. I have all these questions, man, for sure. So that's what makes me nervous about politics in general. It's not about even Trump. It's about, how do Christians participate in politics? Do we, in the same time that we say that, you know, having a slave is illegal, and if you have a slave, you're going to go to jail. Well, what if you get an abortion? If that's what abortion really is, you know, if it's clearly the taking of life. What if you do a transition surgery on a child? If that's what that surgery really is. It's not a surgery to make you better, it's mutilation. Where do we draw the lines? Where do we be consistent? Because there were times when Jesus absolutely could have followed the trends of his culture and said, yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to exterminate evil by using political power through the law, through violence, maybe even military power. But let's just say through the law, through laws. And instead, he at times offered grace. And he did so in such a way that made him vulnerable. And he did so in such a way that let people hurt him and even kill him. And so I'm not saying that we become pacifists. I don't think Christians should be pacifists. But
I think that, I mean, if you just look at King David or just some Bible history, right? So I would say that, you know, God calls us to do what we do best, use our talents to, and then glorify him in it. I don't think that, you know, for example, church and state, I think they need to help each other, but in terms of forcing it, I think that's a problem, right? We should have the choice of free religion. But when it comes to Trump, that's how I see it. I see him being a talented businessman, running the biggest, most important business in the world, which is the United States of America.
Yeah.
And, you know, he will glorify God by doing it. He will mention God. He's not going to force God into people. But, you know, what I see on the left is demonic. Did you see the Olympics entry?
Yeah, goodness.
Like, I'm like, what's going on here? Like, we're talking about, I mean, not only that, the way that the movement for the protesters that are, let me put a video here.
Yeah.
For the we're looking at did I put it up here?
I think you had it.
I don't think
Palestine
I put it
and
up.
USA
Where?
below.
Oh yeah, here it is. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is in Washington. DC, like.
Could you imagine if that was a Trump flag?
I can't imagine that.
You know what people would say,
I can't imagine that being a Trump flag because Trump's flag is America's flag.
Sure. But
You know what I mean?
Like,
Like,
imagine what people would say, the screaming and the...
the difference.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The difference in
It will
reaction.
be, yeah. And a lot of these people are white people, which pisses me off a little bit more. It's like, so did these people learn this in schools? Or did they go somewhere? I mean,
I think they learn it on the internet more than anywhere. I honestly think that it's the internet.
Burn that shit! Burn that shit! Burn that shit!
I mean, they're speaking in English.
Yep.
I'm confused. And now that I mentioned white people, you know what really gets me angry? When I hear people of different races that are not white bashing the white man. And you're a white man, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you a white man? Okay,
Yeah.
good.
It's funny though.
I don't want to assume,
Yeah, I know.
Uh,
Well, it's funny because my last name GANNAIO is how my family says it because we're from Jersey.
sounds Italian. That's what I was going to
It's
say.
funny you say it. I never grew up thinking of myself as white. I know that's the strangest thing to hear. I always grew up thinking I'm not white, I'm Italian.
Yeah,
Because my family had that pride.
that makes sense.
That immigrant pride because that's where we're from. We're from
Yeah,
Northeast.
that makes sense. I
But you're
understand
right.
that.
Yeah.
But I mean, didn't every white person felt like that at a point in their life until they had,
Someone
so
said-
many kids that they're like, well, I'm not Italian anymore, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Like you
I
come
think
from
after a
England
while-
and then you just migrated to the United
my
States.
grandparents definitely have more of a sense than I do. That they're
Right.
Italian. Yeah.
Right.
absolutely.
So, in terms of the attack on the white man, how do you feel about that? Like, do you see the stupidity in it like I do?
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, I would say this is again what I want to over and over again. Like, even though I'm indecisive and I have reservations about what Trump seems to hold up as being valuable, we can talk about that. I don't want to minimize at all the threat from the American left and from postmodernism, from cultural Marxism, from all of these things that folks like Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, I think why do they speak to people? Because those things are threats. Because those things are dangerous and they're ultimately they lead to
They sound like communist.
and
They do. When you say something like, if you don't vote for me, you're not black, that sounds like communism. Recently, Kamala Harris said on a video, if you criticize what I think, you're racist and sexist.
yeah.
Excuse me?
Right. And that shuts down something
Conversation, freedom of speech.
and that's
in
what the
itself.
country was built on.
Right.
And so one of the Martin Luther King, one of the famous things he said was, we want America to fulfill the promises it was built on. And I think that conservatives do a far better job of that than liberals do in general, in this current political discourse. So yeah, I don't want to minimize what the left is doing at all. It's absolutely crazy. And like that, what I see, that's frightening to me, because it's like that whole, I know this was memed a little bit, but like the whole gays for Gaza thing, LGBT people who stand up for Hamas are like,
Stupid.
yeah, they're like, cows or
Did you see
chickens
what
for
the president
KFC.
said? Yeah.
It's-
And you might as well say
true.
chickens for KFC.
It's
Yeah,
true.
it's exactly true.
Because
They will hang you over there.
they will.
Yeah.
They will. And that's what we need to be realistic about. Like, I know that there are other undecided people out there. I know that there are a lot of Christians who are freaked out about Trump, and I'm
So it seems to me like you want Trump, you just don't want to say it.
well, I would love a reason to vote for Donald Trump.
So what are you not getting from Trump is my question.
So what I worry about is that
And I ask from a point of view of I want to learn.
For
I
sure,
want
for sure.
to know if
Yeah.
I'm missing something because
and I respect
Yeah.
you enough to just be real with you about
Yeah.
this, and I know we're having that conversation right now, so I appreciate you about this.
Yeah.
I worry he worships power,
okay,
and I worry he teaches people to worship power.
okay,
And here's just what I mean by that. If the left represents an abandonment of truth and an abandonment of the real, right? And we're just going to say whatever we want to get enough people riled up, and eventually it's going to take a bloodbath, but we're going to get our world. Because that is the communist world, right? That is what Marx wanted. He wanted the proletariat to rise up, and he wanted the capitalist class to die.
yeah.
He did.
Before
He
you
added-
continue on
yeah.
that, okay. So, what examples do you have of Trump where you feel like he worships power?
So I think that the general discourse of strength that he uses, the idea that the way that we protect American values is through strength and through force, is not ultimately true.
Okay,
I think it's true in a limited sense, and here's what I mean. For instance, you're a Christian and you see someone getting mugged. You should not stand there and go, "Oh, I can't use any force to protect that person." No. There are times, King David, Joshua, in the Bible, Phineas, my goodness, the story of Phineas is incredible. If you know the
I've
story.
not.
In the Old Testament, in the book of Exodus, I believe it is, Israel was acclimating itself to idolatry and intermarrying with pagan cultures, and that sort of the mind virus of pagan Canaanite culture or Philistine culture, I believe it was coming into Israel, and none of the priests were doing anything, none of the leaders were doing anything except this one guy Phineas, who watched a guy, an Israelite, take one of these girls from another culture into his tent, and as the story goes, it's a crazy story. He grabs a spear and he stabs through both of them. It's in the Bible. Damn. He kills both of them. God had sent a plague on the Israelites, not because of what he did, but because of what everyone else didn't do. And God said that that's the only reason I'm stopping this plague is because that man had the stones to pick up the spear and get rid of the evil. Now, the only thing that changes, God is getting rid of evil. He is picking up the spear, but how he did it was the cross. He died. That is the scandal of Christianity. That in the very place where all of his disciples expected him to come into Jerusalem and overthrow the Romans. We got to remember, first century Israel, in their places of worship, their true worship of Yahweh were Roman eagles and statues and other, not inside of the temple, this never happened, but there was one at the gate of the temple. We know Herod installed one, as well as factions within Judaism at the time that said, yeah, it's totally fine to offer a pinch of incense to Caesar or to go to the gymnasiums or go to the theaters. Theaters at the time were religious ceremonies as well as entertainment. You would see scandalous things. You would see reenacted the stories of paganism. They said, oh, it's fine, it's fine. So these were people like accommodating the left back then. And in response, the Pharisees came out and the Essenes said, no, we need to return back to the law. We need to go back to that days where we picked up the spear and we just got rid of them because it's the truth. And when Jesus came, he told them they weren't wrong about what they believed. It was evil and it should be eradicated and it will be eradicated, but not by them. And that's what I struggle with, is that it's not even so much about Trump himself. I think I would have this problem if it was Mitt Romney or whoever. But my question is, my thing that I'm wrestling with is, can Christians be like Jesus, who destroyed evil by letting it kill him and then resurrecting and then initiating this thing called the church and then inviting us into his life, when we go and we turn to politics, which uses, the Bible talks about the state. What is the fundamental defining feature of the state, countries? It holds the sword, which means it holds a monopoly on the power to kill people. So only, when the state kills someone, we call it an execution, but when I kill someone, it's a homicide, right?
Right.
But we say that the state can kill people because we have this thing called law and justice.
Okay.
And that's true. but can Christians use that? And that's been a debated thing throughout Christian history. And so my worry is that, again, not only does he, I think, worship that power and show people how to worship that power and say that, hey, the way to get the kingdom of God on earth, the way to get that thing to come back is we need to pass the right laws and elect the right people. But I think that our hope should be in the Lamb. I think that happens through a different process. I don't think that happens through political process, because political process is fundamentally coercive in nature, and the Bible talks about that. And the only other thing I would add is, and this is where I would feel like I think you can relate to me, there are a lot of Christians who are horrified at Trump's personal life. I think that it's very clear that the media and that his opponents slander him. So let me get that right off the bat. Yeah. Not enough people say that. The crap about him hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein, all that stuff. I don't know. But what if Kamala Harris had 5 kids with 3 guys? What would it be? What would the discourse be like if his personal life was on the other side of things? We would rightly be concerned. And a lot of the things that people say is, well, I'm not voting for him to be a moral exemplar. I'm voting for him to run the business, right? But if you see where I struggle with.
I understand that part. So, okay, so we do have 2 options. Mm-hmm. You presented a third option. Mm-hmm. Does that third option help us in any way?
Yeah, this is an amazing question, and so this is where I would push the strongest from what I do. When we think of political action, oftentimes we have a very narrow view of what's political. We say it's voting. But Christians have not understood politics as voting for the majority of Christianity. In fact, most people didn't have the right to vote until about 400 years ago, and even then it's more like 200 years ago, and then women, and very recently. So are we trying to say that there was no such thing as political action before then? Well, absolutely not. I think that there would be, if you don't vote and you're not involved in the local political process, if you're not thinking about your neighborhood as more than just the block that you're on and you never talk to your neighbors, being a good neighbor is political. Caring about your streets is political. Your sidewalks is political. Caring about your neighbor's kids, you know what I mean? A homeschool co-op is political. When someone in your Bible study group struggles financially and you guys take a collection for that person, that's a political action. Why is it only political when the state does it? No, we're also doing those things too. And so what I would want to say is, if you're struggling with voting, or if you're a Christian who doesn't vote, you have to think about what political action will continue to look like for you going forward. And you have to get involved somehow. If you're not going to vote, perhaps that's fine. Perhaps it's not, but perhaps it's fine. If that's the case, then you absolutely need to expand the definition of political. And I think people who do vote and who are I think there are people who are scandalized by people who don't vote, I think, because like you said, there are people who come from a place where your vote either was meaningless, like truly meaningless, or you didn't have it at all. And you think, how can you throw away this blessing? Absolutely not. That's what I would say as well to those people is like, look, we have more political power than just this vote. And if it's the case that corporations and media and power with big money that we can't even think through, you know what I mean? Like nothing will ever experience in our life.
Anthony, I'm getting confused. Okay, so the third option that you're presenting, is it an option? Well, I'm not understanding it. Is it like something that will not choose Trump or Biden or Harris?
Yeah.
Then who is it? And like, what is the third option? And
I think it's considering the church as your political society.
So what does that mean?
Yeah. So I think the church, considering the church as the political society would mean taking forms of community that normally we get from the state, systems of welfare, systems of education, even stuff like public utilities, and finding ways for the church to provide those things instead as a kind of alternate society.
Regardless of who's in charge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there will be somebody in charge.
In the church, do you mean?
No, in the United States, right?
Oh, there always is.
Right. There's
yeah.
gonna be somebody. So it's a wrong for me to think as a Christian that the better person for church or for everybody in this case would be Trump.
I don't think that that's wrong at all. No,
Right.
absolutely not.
So what are your thoughts against that? Because to me, in terms of the United States, we have two options.
Yeah.
You just explain all the reasons why the left is a horrible option. You gave me a few reasons why Trump is not a good option.
Yeah.
But it still seems like it's not, I don't want to say the lesser evil because I believe Trump is a good person.
Yeah.
Did he sin? Did he make mistakes?
Sure, but everyone does.
Absolutely.
Right.
But for the majority of the things that he wants compared to the majority of the things that the left wants, I want him as the president because I fear that if he's not the president, I might need to move out of this country based on the way that it would head. Like if I have to worry about gas prices or the economy, I might consider Argentina. There's a cop that's from Atlanta that's moving to Argentina, having his third baby over there because of the, I mean, the left, it's pushing on things like removing the cops.
Let me entertain that idea real quick. Because I would want to say, first of all, any Christian who votes for Trump, in my eyes, is a Christian.
Okay.
And we might disagree about politics, but at the end of the day, that's our Lord and Savior Jesus. He's in charge of this whole story called human history.
Right.
And whoever becomes president, the story is still actually about
Have
Jesus.
you seen the video of Trump admiring Jesus?
Which one do you mean?
There's a video that he just basically says, a lot of people tell me that I'm great, that I'm the greatest man alive, that I'm, the best man in the world. And no, I'm not. There's one better. And his name is Jesus Christ. And everybody goes crazy. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen it, but
I feel like the power part, he looks powerful for sure.
He is powerful,
But
I sure hope the president is.
See, worship power, I don't think he does over Jesus. I don't think he does over religion. I mean,
He may not. He may not. He absolutely may not. I may be wrong about everything I said, for sure. What gives me pause about that is the Bible talks about even the demons believe.
Oh, yeah.
And so I do worry about, I hear a lot of Trump supporters when I talk to them, they'll say things like that. Well, like, look, he's giving credit for God who saved his life in the assassination attempt, which, by the way, he's right. God did save his life in the assassination attempt.
You think so?
God is sovereign over every event. Every event.
Before you continue,
go
I
ahead.
want to show you this video that has to do with this. And I want to know your thoughts on this because I feel like this was not answered correctly or it wasn't answered at all. Actually, when the video ends, I feel like Byron Donalds, or I think that's his name. Yeah, Byron Donalds should have answered and didn't. So let's watch this and then give me some perspective on it, please.
You don't have to believe in God to see God's miracle in your life from a believer. Whether you're an atheist, no matter what you believe in, whether I even like you or not, I can recognize the fact that something happened that stayed you away from death or pain or a grave circumstance. I equate it to the hand of God moved on your life. That's the first thing. Second thing, you kind of made it sound like Donald Trump is Thanos, man. Like, nobody's trying to make him into like a demigod. He doesn't have the magical gauntlet. But you do got to recognize the fact that literally, and I talked to him about it, the way he turned his head at the podium, which he typically will do, it was this much. And you have to acknowledge that it's not just luck. I do believe millions of Americans
that's just luck.
God's hand is on it.
I mean, that's the difference between how we see it. But, okay.
So here we go. This is where it gets a little bit interesting. I'm pausing the video.
I agree. Everything he just said. Everything he just said is correct.
Right. Yeah. And this is a Christian. I love this man right here on screen right now.
I don't actually know him.
Byron Donalds. He's a Republican. He has a beautiful background story. And he also talks a lot for the black community to make sure that people understand that there's blacks for Trumps also and stuff like that.
We just see that differently. Some people see, there's
reasons.
this order and everything, and some people see randomness. What about the guy behind him who got shot? Because,
Tragedy.
I know, but like you say, God's not happy with that guy? No, but I mean, it's like, how do you justify that? Why did God let,
It's like, whew, good job, Jesus. Wait, what? Jesus? No, there were two. Oh. It wasn't just, there were two. No, never mind. Maybe,
what is God's answer to that? Shit happens, I can't be everywhere? It's just,
So Byron just says, that's tough. It's a little bit of a gray area for me to talk about it because I don't want to say that I know God's plan. But I can imagine if this hero didn't die, taking that bullet, for example, how many people could have created different stories out of it? I mean, there's already people out there that say that this was a fake attempt. Yeah. So imagine if the bullet didn't hit nobody, how many people would be saying nobody even got hit?
And there's no evidence of that, of course.
Obviously. So how do you answer Bill Mayer on the fact that a hero that threw himself on top of his family to save them, took a bullet to the head, and does save them? How does God answer to that?
I think there's a certain fittingness in if God is not just in control of the Trump head turn, but also of the man who got shot and the shooter, that it makes sense that a man whose character was to throw himself onto his family is the one who took that bullet. Because if we could talk to him right now, do you think he regrets it? Of course not. Of course he doesn't. A man who sacrifices himself for his family is ready to go. Yeah. Does that make it not a tragedy? No. Does that make it out of God's control? Also no. So there's something fitting about, I'm not saying he should have died.
No, I understand that.
You know what I mean?
And that's where the gray area is for me.
This is where the gray area.
Right.
But let me add this though too. And here's what, again, I find both sides often lacking here. I like what that guy said. And if he says, well, I would want him to say, God's providence over anyone's living or dying does not imply acceptance. And there's biblical evidence for that. For instance, 10 plagues in Egypt, right? In the Bible. 5 of them, Pharaoh hardens his own heart. And he says no. And the next plague comes, and the next plague comes, and the next plague comes. The last 5, God hardens Pharaoh's heart. It is God's sovereign providence, not just luck, that Pharaoh hardens his heart. He says no to Moses' policy proposal, let my people go. And the next plague comes, and the next plague comes, and the next plague comes. Over and over again in the scriptures, God elevates political leaders. God's hand is on their lives. I mean, the Assyrian king screaming into the walls of Jerusalem in the book of 2 Kings as he's about to conquer the city says, your God has sent me here. And later in the prophets, God says, I will crush Assyria for what they did to you. But wait a minute, God, didn't you send them? Yes, I did. It's all part of his greater, I hate this phrase, but plan and purpose, right? Because again, God uses the forces of history not to tell a story about America's triumph or Christians' triumph or this country or that country or this group or that group, but God's glory. And that human history is primarily the story about God. And so the only thing that I think that gentleman...
Human history is primarily the story about God.
Yeah, human history is primarily about God and who God is. And that's heady. But one of the things that I hear a lot, I'll hear people say, well, God saved Trump. Yes, but that doesn't mean approval.
Right.
And it's very dangerous to think that anyone who he keeps alive means approval, because then, there's so many examples of why it could go wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Again, how does that relate to the question of voting? I think that Christians who vote for Donald Trump are doing the absolute best that they think of. They're informing their faith. They're not racists. They're not violent people. I don't even necessarily think they're worshiping power. I think that there's great arguments to say, hey man, get off your high horse, go stick the vote because the other guy really is just as bad as you say he is. And you need to stop worrying about getting your hands dirty, and being so pure. That's my temptation. Yeah. Is I want to separate. I want to have nothing to do with the world. I want to get out. You know what I mean? And that's wrong too. And so that's where that's where not voting, I think, is the weakest. But again,
So you're voting for Trump.
As of when I walked into this door, you want to know what I was planning on doing? I was planning on casting a third-party protest vote for the American Solidarity Party. Have you ever heard of them?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're a Christian Democratic Party. They're websites online. They'll never get elected. And yes, your vote for not one of the two big ones is a throwaway vote. Absolutely. But again, I think that one of the theologians who I've been very, very influenced by when I did my master's degree at Duke was a professor there who's wrote a lot of books, who kind of started a movement in theology. His name was Stanley Hauerwas, and he has this line. He talks about politics as his primary place of focus. He says, the purpose of the church is to show the world that it is the world. I'll say it again. The purpose of the church is to show the world that it is the world. And so this is his idea of the church is a contrast society. When you not just walk into the doors of a church building, but when you are around people, when you're doing what we're doing right now, when you're at home in your home, when you have people over, when the church is gathering, when 2 and 3 are gathered together in my name, the rules are different. What it means to succeed, what it means to fail, what it means to be righteous and unrighteous and holy and lifted up and encouraged and successful, all that stuff changes in the church, man. And you know that. You've experienced that.
Yeah.
And so as much as I would want to give space for people to participate in American political processes, we can't ever forget that, like, our hope is in the Lamb at the end of it, you know, not in the elephant or the donkey. You know, it's like, I saw that little bumper sticker recently.
I like that.
You know what I mean?
That's really
It's like-
cool. Why do pastors not get involved in politics? Because I have a theory. It feels like they want to, attract more people to the church at times.
Yeah.
Would that be true at times?
Yeah, I think that's why some do. Yeah.
Okay. Why can't a pastor be like, you know what? Somebody that loves God, that is true and pure, needs to run for president. Like, how come that hasn't happened yet?
I think.
What do you think?
I think there's a couple of reasons. One is that I think we have experiences where people will lose their tax exempt status, because that's part of the conditions of being a tax exempt religious organization. Is there are certain laws about what you can and can't say from
if you don't win, can you just take it back? Get it back? Or
I don't. Yeah. Thankfully, I'm not in a position to have to make these decisions, because I'd probably mess it up. But I do know that there are some rules on tax exempt status now, whether or not it's worth it or not, kind of thing.
Yeah.
If it's the truth, you know what I mean? So that's one part. But another thing, yes, you're right. Maybe some folks don't want to offend people, but I do think that, again, internal to Christianity is this suspicion of political power. There is a long history, much older than any other theme I can think of. I mean, Augustine wrote a book called The City of God, this idea that there's two cities, the city of man, city of God, and it was all about the relationship of humans to politics. He was living at the end of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was collapsing, and the pagan Romans were blaming Christians. They said, oh, you made us stop, people stopped worshiping the Roman gods, so Rome got weak. Rome's military got weak. That's what they said. And Augustine was like, no, that's not why. God sends countries and he brushes countries away. And it's his story. He uses them. Political people rise and fall. And so
I feel like Biden was put on for a reason.
I think as Christians, we can't just say that Trump is anointed. We have to say every leader is anointed. Now,
what do you mean by anointed? I don't understand that word. Voted
brought
for?
to that position
By God?
for a special purpose.
Okay.
And what's nice is we actually always know what that purpose is. That purpose is always God's glory. So
I could definitely see the purpose of Biden. Like, he showed us the dark side, for sure, of things and where we could end up.
I don't know how, as a thinking person, you can watch his performance in that debate and not be anything other than sad.
What got me really upset is that I feel like most people on the right, at least the people that I followed, through this whole thing, they've been saying this for years.
Oh, I know. Don't even get me started.
Come
Go
on, like,
Reddit.
we all already knew. It wasn't a surprise, right?
Everyone wanted to call Trump a meanie for saying Sleepy Joe. He was the only one sounding the alarm bell. And now everyone forgot about that whole Sleepy Joe thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what drives me nuts. Yeah.
What I was gonna ask you about the elections 2020.
Yeah. I don't know why I would disbelieve that there's election interference where it was possible. Yeah.
What? Okay,
Yeah,
you just
no,
confused. Disbelief that there was or what?
So I'm here's what I'm pessimistic, and I think that there's election interference almost all the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you think every by interference you mean like that people
I think foreign powers
that
are
people
interested.
voting?
Yep. In
foreign powers outside of the United
Yep.
States? Okay.
And I also think that people on both sides, but I definitely saw in the case of like Pennsylvania and stuff that there was suspicious activity and it went through litigation and it got buried in the litigation and the media doesn't want to report on the 180-page briefing.
Right, but they do report that there's no evidence. And they tell Trump to his face that there's no evidence.
Well,
Well,
you know
there's
what's
plenty of
interesting?
evidence.
I was looking at this once. CNN's language it uses is that there is no widespread evidence. It's funny, that phrase is not there is no evidence. It's that there is no widespread evidence. And that's basically, you can use that as a legalese essentially to say, oh yeah, there's evidence. It's just not widespread. And so to me, I'm just like, would I be shocked if people were misbehaving in elections? Not at all. Not at all.
Who do you think runs the world
God does.
besides God?
But it doesn't look like that. Yeah. I'm skeptical of theories that say that there is a small group of elites who run the world. And here's why. If there is a small group of elites that run the world, the Bible tells us that they do not make their decisions based in freedom. They are slaves to sin. And so if there is a small elite group of people who runs the world, globalists, George Soros, whatever, which is possible. I think that's completely possible.
I believe it.
He's not in control of his actions. He thinks he is, and sometimes we think he is too.
He thinks he's God.
Oh, I'm sure he does. But what we take solace in as Christians is that he isn't in charge. He's being manipulated by sin, insofar as he's not a Christian, and we know he's not. He knows he's not. He's fairly open about these things. And so, who runs the world? The answer really is God, because sin is. There's that old picture of the devil and God like arm wrestling. Completely false. That's Gnosticism. The devil and God are not equals. They're not arm wrestling. The devil is completely under God's sovereignty, and the story is already moving towards conclusion, in which every tear will be wiped from the eyes, and the Lamb will reign in the New Jerusalem with his people. And the sword will come out from the mouth, and evil will be cast out from the cosmos. That's what we wait for. And that waiting part is why I get nervous about politics, because sometimes we just want that world. And yeah, we should. But it happens on God's timing, and it happens in God's way. And we don't know how it's going to happen. We don't know if it's going to happen tomorrow or in 10,000 years. And if we want to make it happen tomorrow, we want to do things to bring about the kingdom of heaven on earth, then we're saying, oh, who runs the world? We do. Humans do. But that's, I think, the answer to the question. Who runs the world? Not us. No one. No, not even George Soros and Bill Gates and, God knows who else, the World Bank and IMF.
Does. Very interesting answer. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. Top 3 books of all times.
Ooh. Okay. Obviously, other than the Bible, I'm going to say The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. That's kind of like, your typical, thinker person's book. It's an amazing book. Highly recommend. It's one of Jordan Peterson's favorite books as well, actually.
Can you repeat the name?
The Brothers Karamazov.
What is Karamazov?
That's their last name.
Okay.
So this book was written in the 1800s by a Russian guy named Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Okay.
And it is a book of realist fiction, so it's very realistic.
Fyodor Dostoevsky sounds like that character from Game of Thrones.
It certainly does. It's about a murder mystery.
Okay.
There was these 3 boys, the Dostoevsky brothers, three different mistresses of this old rich miser whose name was Fyodor Pavlovich, and he was this old, disgusting, lecherous man in Tsarist Russia. And one day someone beat his head in with a candlestick, and he's found dead in his house. And the middle brother is suspected and tried of doing it when I won't spoil it.
Yeah.
But It's an amazing
Interesting.
exploration of human nature. I would say another one is
Exploration of human nature.
Yeah,
Man, I love the way
absolutely.
you
It's
talk. That's so good. Okay, another two.
he was a Christian too, which is cool. Another two, I would say The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, he didn't really write it. It was composed and put together by his son after his death. But what I really like about it is the creation story. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
He was a Christian himself. And in The Silmarillion, it depicts his like early mythology of like the Middle-earth universe. And it is a fundamentally Christian perspective told in story form, told in myth form. So it's not replacing the Bible, but it's retelling the story from a creative perspective, kind of like the Chronicles of Narnia.
Okay.
And it's just really good because it emphasizes kind of what we've been talking about. Humans have a responsibility to build this world up and to do things in this world that are good for people and not just sit and like peace out and not care about what happens in their societies.
Right.
So I think this is a great book that talks about this. And then the third one, it's so hard. I'll give a nonfiction one now. It's a book by a conservative political social critic named Christopher Lasch. It's called The True and Only Heaven. I read this book in undergraduate. I had a professor who I loved, who was kind of my mentor. I saw him 2 weeks ago. It's called The True and Only Heaven by Christopher Lasch. And it is a history of American populist movements. Okay, so this idea of populism, Trump gets called a populist, but Bernie Sanders was also a populist, right? And so how can both left and right be populist? Well, he traces this history, and he talks about the concept of progress and progressivism, and he shows that a lot of the ways we talk about politics today are limited. They're much more limited than what they used to be in the 18th century and the 19th century, as a tradition called civic republicanism, which was a different way of being American, but not Marxist, not communist, not Marxist, but not like liberal.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just purely conservative either. It was civic republican or populist. And it was essentially it talks about the sensibilities of like middle-class people, lower middle-class people, who, as we know, people like the Democrats, look down on, middle-class people, lower middle class is not anyone who should have any say in society, according to the elites of our society. But this book traces their history and the morality and talks about the forces that made them rise and fall in the political system in America, and maybe what we could do to recover some of that today. It's a very, very good book. It's changed my life. For
How
sure.
old were you when you read like your very first book that you're like, wow, like I gotta read another? Because I never had that mindset. Like growing up, just very different. I was more of I want to play with toys and stuff and throw the book to the side. And you give me a feeling like that you read a book and you're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing, and you just kept going.
My mom and my dad were compulsive movers. They would always move houses.
Okay.
And so I spent a lot of time in the car.
Okay.
And the first book that I ever fell in love with was this is so nerdy, an Audubon field guide for birds.
Okay.
So the first half of the book was just natural science facts about birds. It was like an Audubon. It was for adults.
Okay.
And the second half was just beautiful photography of birds.
Okay.
From the natural area. And that was the first book that I remember. I might have been, my mom would know, 7,
Okay.
8. I would sit and I would read. I would look at every picture and I would read every word of that book. To this day, I can identify almost any bird.
Nice.
But that was the first book I fell
Have you
in
ever
love
seen a
with.
tocoloro?
What is that?
The national bird of Cuba. Just testing you. Just testing you.
No. I
It
haven't
has
seen
the
one.
Cuban colors. It's
Oh,
red,
really?
white, and blue.
Oh,
And
cool,
it's,
cool.
it's a pretty cool bird.
Are they in Miami?
Cuba.
They
I
don't fly up?
I don't know.
I need to get down. I
Maybe.
need to get down to Miami and I need to see if I find one.
That might be
Go to Cuba.
possible. I would
Would you
know.
Would you ever go back to Cuba?
I've been back.
Yeah.
I went back a few times. I can't go back now because the show that I got going on over here is talks a lot against communism.
Criticizes,
So
yeah.
I could end up
It's
in jail
dangerous.
if I go over there. Yeah, it's. I made that decision. I
Do
made the
you-
decision to go to fully talk the way I feel about my country and know that it's possible that I can't go back.
What's your? Because I have a lot to learn from you.
Yeah.
Here's you've been really kind to me and stuff, but I respect where you come from. I have never had that experience, and I know that's kind of a silver spoon in my mouth. you
Okay.
know? What would you say to your people like if you could just go back and you had like 5 minutes to stand on a box in the corner and just tell the truth? I know that's so hard, but like,
What would I say to my people?
yeah, like if you were just in a mall, or like you had 5 minutes on TV, you like interrupted Castro, combing his hair or whatever.
If you're hungry, go to the places in Cuba that have food and eat the food. Go into a hotel and go into the buffet where the food that they're not giving you is, and they're giving it to all the tourists,
Yeah.
and eat that food. And use a whole group. Grab 300 people, I don't know, your friends, and do that. To the gangsters, to the people that are the gangsters of Cuba that are stabbing tourists and killing people to, take a little bit of money or gold or whatever. Why don't you try the police or political people that are actually, hurting the Cuban people instead of innocent human beings? Outside of that, to the, there's... I will tell you this, man. Cuba is a land that what is left is a lot of filth. I don't know that I trust my people anymore that are left. Yeah. Most of the good ones are here. Most of the good people leave. I don't, I go back to Cuba and there's so many innocent, great people, but by the time that they turn 18, they're either gonna turn, if they're girls, they're gonna turn to prostitution. They probably start getting raped around 12, 13, 14. It's just the natural thing that happens over there because there's no
oversight.
Like, there's just nothing anymore. There's no, back when I was growing up in Cuba, the parents really, grouped themselves against the government. So it was like society versus the government. But once everybody started leaving the country, the ones that barely survived are the ones that have family here.
Yeah.
The separation of the families created a lot of issues because I got family in Cuba right now that if I decide to talk to them, they're being fake to me. They just want some money. They want something to survive. I would urge the God's people to step up and do anything that they possibly can to speak up, even if it costs you death. Because I think that, like, looking at Venezuela, I'm a little bit jealous because the Cuban movement in 2020, July 11, 2020, we had a protest and everybody, like so many young Cubans threw themselves to the street and asking for freedom. And it was so inspiring. And I'm like, wow, this actually is happening.
Yeah.
And then you see the cops just beating them up, and you see, the military people coming out, filling up the trucks with loads of people and, disappearing them and putting them in jail until it calms down, and then they put them back in the streets. So what we saw actually was a percentage of the population, let's say maybe 40 to 50%, throw themselves out on the street because they're hungry. They've had enough. There's no electricity. There's no way to even, maintain the food that you gather. Like, you gather some meat and it's enough for the week, and all of a sudden you don't have electricity. It goes bad. It's devastating, right? In Cuba, you live for tomorrow. In here, you live for the next 5, 10 years. Like, what am I doing now to build that goal?
Right.
In Cuba, you live for how do I eat tomorrow? How do my kids eat tomorrow? It's literally like savage.
Is there something you would, because like one of the things that I also am critical of the Republican Party for is that it feels like, and if listeners want to go on to a great podcast called The Briefing, it's a news podcast by R. Albert Mohler, who's the president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, great leader in our denomination.
I think I've seen it.
Mm-hmm. He criticizes the Republican Party for stepping back on abortion because we've seemed to have kicked it to the states.
Trump is not.
Well, so J.D. Vance and Trump both are kicking it to the states, and previously,
I think that's a good idea.
It might be. It very well might be. But one of the things that we have to wrestle with is if abortion is what Christians say it is, that's
right.
Then why not a federal ban on abortion? And now I don't know if I support a federal ban on abortion for the same reason I am freaked out about politics.
I struggle with abortion because I think that abortion is a topic that you can. First off, society's being lied to, right? They think that it's a clump of cells.
Yeah, whatever.
They think that, like they can have sex and not be responsible for
mom. Yeah,
right. So if you understand anything from communism, is that people can be really stupid, not because of their own choices, but because of what society taught them, right? So if we're teaching most people that it's okay, and then all of a sudden we put a ban, most people are gonna be like, "What? Like you're crazy." Which is why I kind of like the state idea, because some states think that they should push it all the way. And the United States, you got to think about the United States as it's not one country. It's a bunch of countries put together. It's 51 countries put together. I mean, Florida's bigger than Cuba.
Yeah,
You know,
much bigger.
so I like the idea of having different rules in different states because it just makes sense. If all the stupid people want to go and live in California, hey, go ahead. Destroy that state. Leave Florida alone. I'm okay with that idea. Do I want that to happen? No, I want everywhere to have peace and tranquility and love, and I want families everywhere, and I don't want people to deal with their own, shit, whatever the situation may be. But I like the idea of putting in the states because I think it's radical to a lot of people to completely make it
is.
a federal
Absolutely,
thing,
it
right?
is.
So here's where I struggle with abortion. If it's rape, I don't know that I want that kid to be born. I personally, as a Christian, I don't want abortion anywhere.
Yeah.
I think a kid has right to life 100%. Even the one that, might have come out of rape, but it's a gift from God to have a baby. I mean, I used to question whether I want to have more kids because of the money I have. And I've come down to the idea of, dude, I'm going to have as many kids as I possibly can, regardless of how much money I have. Because guess what? For the first one, we had no money, and I figured it out. For the second one, we had no money, and I figured it out. And my best friend got like 5 kids, and he's
make it
okay.
work. Yeah.
You make it work, right? And eventually those kids actually help out if you raise them right.
Yeah.
So I feel like the money drives a lot of people, but at the end, I think that when it comes to rape, like a 14-year-old girl got raped by by another human, I feel like both the baby and that human need to be eradicated. Like they just need to leave the earth and go to hell, or maybe God can take care of them. I don't know. That's just how I feel about that specific situation. Outside of that, I just hate that people play with sex,
For sure.
and stuff like that. But that's my thoughts on abortion.
It's a tough situation, I think, all the way around. And that's, again, one of those places where, like, no matter what you decide, you're putting it into law, and you're using the government to enforce that view. And so whatever that view is, whether it's kicking it to the states, whether it's total legalization, whether it's total federal ban, like it's always using the power of state. I was going to ask, what would you say the Republican platform could do for Cuba and for Cubans? Like, is there something you would want to see?
Trump
there?
is the only president this is why he got all the Cubans in his pocket. He's the only president that has spoken against communism in terms of we're going to end it. Like around the world, if possible.
Yeah.
Specifically in Cuba.
Yeah.
He wants Cuba to be free.
Yeah.
He talks about that every time he goes to Miami. He talks about Venezuela being free. And he sees it from a point of view of how it will benefit America.
Yeah, of course.
How will he do it? I mean, I don't think he's going to use American soldiers to do it. But Cuba depends a lot on the United States. Cuba promotes that the United States is the devil, that the United States is the enemy to its people. And it's funny because the United States still, provides chicken and a bunch of things to Cuba. And obviously they don't promote that, right? Because the Cuban people don't need to know. But the point is that I believe that you can truly create a blockade. Like Cuba says that they have a blockade. There's no blockade.
Yeah.
All right? But if we can truly create a blockade around Cuba, that would probably be the best thing for Cuba because it will push the people to go to the government and ask, questions or answers or whatever. I think that the Trump administration in 2016 through 2020 was the roughest on Cuba. And because of that, we had a riot in 2020.
Yeah.
I mean,
They were tired of it. Yeah.
absolutely.
That's
Trump,
interesting, yeah.
Trump created that riot.
Yeah.
And people don't see that, don't link those things up. People on the
That's
left,
not
at
in the
least,
news at all.
they don't
Yeah,
link those
absolutely.
things up, but
Yeah.
I can see it because I saw it build up. There's this guy in Miami that does a show. He's gay. He supports Trump. He supports the family. He's a gay man. I respect those a lot more than everything else that's on the extreme left, right? And he has a big following of Cubans in Miami. The exile of Miami, basically, of Cuba, follows him a lot. And he pushed, for Trump to be elected, and all the, he really basically educated people on Trump and how he will help. And when the riot happened, it kind of confirmed everything to me that what Trump does does affect Cuba.
Yeah.
You know, all the policies that he have, the hard hand that he puts on countries like Cuba. Yeah, is there a price to pay of death?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
People are gonna die regardless. But let me tell you, under communism, there has been a lot more deaths than the ones that Trump will create by not creating, opportunities for Cuba. And at the end, the true fault of the people dying in Cuba will not be in Trump's hand. It's gonna be the person that runs the government. Because at any time they can open elections so people can vote for an actual president instead of the one that we have right now, which is Díaz-Canel, which is just a president that was appointed by Raúl Castro, Fidel's brother. Fidel's kids, Fidel pushed equality for everybody, diversity. Fidel pushed all this, great ideas how everything needs to be equal. But he had a Mercedes Benz.
Cubans pushed that I've heard that narrative.
Right. But he had a Mercedes Benz while Cubans had no cars.
Right.
He had the biggest houses in Cuba. He has everything. It's a mafia, is what it is.
Yeah.
They have all the wealth, all the good things, including the guns. They took the guns away from everybody.
Yep.
Which is the number one thing that can't happen in this country. We have to keep our guns. Like, I don't know if you're anti-gun or what.
No.
We need guns. I just from a Cuban, let me tell you, we need guns. Like, because the government has guns.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If the government didn't have guns, the only protection that we have from our own government is guns. When you take that from the people, which is what they did in Cuba, like, okay, we can go to the street and protest, but when a tank comes over to run us over, military people are coming over with the biggest weapons, that we don't have.
Yeah.
What chance do we stand?
Well, yeah, absolutely. That's something I always think. Even with the guns, when a lot of people say like, well, why keep guns? Well, because this is a country founded on a revolution, and there might be a day again when it needs to. But I often think like the police is so militarized. They have drones and sound cannons and all that. So that's one question. But
I get it. There's definitely things that we can talk in between that, and what's right or what isn't. But the moment that they try to pass laws to take guns away from us, the civilians,
it only benefits the people in charge.
right?
That's clear.
That's the point where I draw the line. Okay, no AKs or whatever. The school shootings. Okay, there's a lot of ways to prevent school shootings, and taking guns away is not one of them. How about we put guns in teachers' waistband or something? I don't know. That might create another problem because a student can steal one or something. But I don't know. At least more security, more protection can happen in schools versus, I don't know. I don't want to get off topic.
No, it's okay.
But everything that Trump did helped Cuba from the point of view of them freeing themselves.
Yeah,
and that's how it's going to happen. Cuba's not going to be free unless the people decide to make it free.
Yeah.
Just like Venezuela, the riot just broke out yesterday because the opponent of Maduro won tremendously by 73%
of course
of
he did.
votes.
Yeah, right.
And Maduro was like, my name is Maduro, and I'm the president of Venezuela, and I won by, did you see his math?
Yeah, he's
109% total. Like,
sometimes I wonder if he's a real person.
dude, and
Says
you know,
stuff that I just-
it's Cuba 30 years ago. Same thing. And now Venezuela has a chance to truly just draw out all of that madness. And dude, the way that they've acted, they're burning down everything that has to do with communist signs or billboards.
Yeah.
The police are taking their shirts off and supporting the people.
Yeah.
The military is like, they had a tank with them.
Yeah.
That's what you're supposed to do. The Cuban people and the police are the same. Like,
and this is why I my own position I try to temper at times, because I've never had to make the decision of like, hey, I live under an oppressive government, an oppressive regime, and I need to make a decision. Do I go out into the streets and participate in a revolution of the government? I've never had to make that. And there were Christians at the beginning of this country called Puritans who had that decision too. What they did is they left England and they came here. They fled and they were looking for freedom. You had to leave your country as well too. The thing that I always come back to is this question of, can you do it without using force? Can you flee? Can you go find somewhere new to live? Like you said, like with Argentina. It's interesting to me that you brought that up, because I wonder if there won't come a time, say folks don't vote, what do you do instead? Maybe you do go somewhere else eventually where there is enough place for you to eke out a living, or maybe you stay and maybe you recognize that means that you and your family are going to suffer, and in suffering you might end up finding both God's provision in utterly unlikely ways, and a likeness to Christ that you didn't have previously because, you know, I lived in a house with a fence and everything was fine. But now that I'm in this dangerous situation, I have the opportunity to be like my Savior and to hopefully put my money where my mouth is. And
I personally, I like to fight. I would fight all day. But then I have a family.
Yeah. Okay.
And,
right.
and, you know, then you're like, I mean, how many people in Cuba, their family have been, you know, affected by the decision of just saying, I'm going to the United States.
Right.
It's hard to deal with that. It's, you know, they have full control. I don't want to leave this country. I love this country. This is my second home. And my kids are American 100%. They're born here. I want them to see a person in me that fought for this country to be in a better place by the time they grow up. That would be my ideal dream, to make sure that I did everything I possibly can, which is one of the reasons why I decided to do this podcast.
Yeah.
So that we can speak against some of the evil that I see as a parent in today's world.
And there's, like you said, this is a political action that you would have been punished for in Cuba that you're free to do here.
Right.
That people should not pretend like is not a privilege, but we should also not pretend like you are being political. You're having political activity and you vote. You know, I want more people to do what you're doing. I want more people to say, hey, there is more for me to do than just vote. By all means, go and vote for Trump. But also go to your local communities. Show up at your city council.
I completely
meetings.
agree with that. I think it matters more, honestly. What you do in your local community matters more than the actual president.
We got to recover that.
I agree with that.
We have more power than I think we know.
And what it takes is to be involved. I think we do, as parents, need to be involved in our communities. We need to make sure that, I mean, I do so much already in terms of, you know, I coach soccer, I coach baseball. I'm trying to be involved in so many kids. It's one of my favorite things to do, is coaching the kids. It's like, it's so rewarding in so many ways. You see so much value in it as they grow and get bigger anyways. But yeah, I want to get involved in you know, the what's going on here in Oldsmar, in the city of Oldsmar.
Absolutely.
Maybe be part of a board or a meeting or something that has to do with my area. And I think a lot of parents need to do that also.
Yeah,
and I think that the worst thing that you could do in today's time in the United States is just walk away from, you know, what your kids are doing in school.
Yeah.
I mean, my parents didn't have an option because they didn't speak English, and they were also older parents. But I feel like most parents just drop off the kids and go. I mean, if you're not involved in what grades your kids are getting and pushing them to try to get better grades, if you feel like your school is teaching them how to think, how to feel instead of how to think, you know, maybe you should be involved in making sure that they teach them how to think, not how to feel, because that's a big one for me. Like, I mean, some of these books that I've seen on the gender ideologies, they just I see Satan right there on the book. It's like, what is this? So I think that's the biggest deal for sure. More important than voting for the presidency, get involved in the communities, get involved in your local areas, your local voting. There is an election coming up, by the way, here in Oldsmar soon. There might be some changes happening. You know, just figure out, like, meet your candidates. Like, these people, they're not famous. They're local just like us.
You can actually get to them.
I actually will. I'm actually going to interview some of them.
Good, yeah.
Yeah,
awesome.
I think my goal is to interview both. I think there's 2 or 3 politicians that are running for Oldsmar.
Okay,
Just so that we can get to know them, maybe present them to my city, and make sure that people just make a good decision on that. Because most people just focus on the president and then they vote the rest Republican.
And then what happens is the people who have the most say over your direct life, they don't have anyone holding them accountable. You're not there. You know, you're not there to call them out. And when you're in the room with them, you're never going to get in the room with the president, you know. And if you are, it's going to be in a giant, you know.
Yeah.
So this is an opportunity for everyone, I think, to get together and to recommit ourselves to our, like, civic duties as Americans, and realize, again, that yes, go out and vote. You know, vote your conscience, I would say, but don't leave it there. You know, go and realize that there is much more responsibility available to us as business owners, as fathers, as teachers, as people in the education system, and just citizens than just the voting.
Absolutely. I think that's the one problem with capitalism. People focus on making money and then they focus on resting.
Yep.
the number one thing that you can do in capitalism is create enough wealth to hire somebody to create more time for you to do more things.
Yeah.
That right there, if you can't go from being an employee to actually creating more time figure out how to create a schedule where you do a lot of things that you love, but eventually it comes time to do bigger and better things, like getting involved in your community, which gives you $0.
Yeah.
How do you accomplish that as a realtor, as a teacher, as whatever it is that you do? You need to be able to make enough money to pay somebody to cover certain things or certain positions in your work area or whatever to create more time, especially as we build our families, etc. I also feel like later in my life, I'll have a lot more time to do a lot more things once my kids are grown. So it gives us a purpose to look at our future, but right now it's important that a lot of us, especially parents, get involved with what's going on in our schools. I mean, our school systems are so weird. They haven't changed in so many years. Me and my wife are homeschooling our kids straight out of the fact that we thought schools were going crazy when COVID happened. Like, we're supposed to teach our own kids? My wife presents the idea of homeschooling. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I met my first girlfriend in school. Like, how are my kids gonna, socialize? And,
co-ops
dude, she explained to me so many different things. And probably for the first year or two, I was in trial mode. Like, let's see how this happens, but I know my kids are going back to school. And the more I did it, the worse school got. And the more things I saw about the kids in school and the things that they're teaching in schools.
It accelerated COVID.
And I'm like, okay, you know what? We made the right choice. Thank you, wife. Thank you, Yvonne, for you in my life. I really appreciate it. That was great. Okay. Let's go into another topic here. All right, 2 hours and 30 minutes. Let's see if we could close at 3 hours. My butt is hurting.
Killing it.
All right, Billy Carson. Billy Carson, this man right here on screen.
Black Knight Satellite.
Black Knight Beyond the Scan. The what? The signs.
Signal.
The signal. Okay, so Billy Carson had a very interesting interview with who was it? Patrick Bet David. Bet David.
Yeah.
And they spoke about God, and he spoke about this tablets right here, the Emerald tablets. Well, there's a couple of things that he said that I want to talk to you about.
Okay.
So the first one is God a frequency? Because he says that God is a frequency. What is your take on God being a frequency? And then we'll get into this Emerald tablets situation. And what is your background on that? Because I got my mind from back. I used to think a little bit like, oh yeah, we used to be aliens and we got planted in this world.
Yeah.
I used to think that way. That makes sense. That's why some are Chinese and some are black and some are white, and and I'm like, okay, and then we mix together, so we must come from another planet. But we'll get into that. What do you think about God being a frequency, as he stated?
So, I didn't grow up around a lot of this stuff. I was never really influenced by like the idea of aliens. I think the idea of aliens is actually fascinating, especially when it comes to non-religious people, because it's often the caricature is like, you believe in God, you have no evidence for that thing. And like, I know that this will frustrate people, but there is no evidence for extraterrestrial life in the hard sense of what evidence means, in the same way that they usually mean it for God. Now, I'm not saying that there is no probabilities or certain types of thought experiments that make the idea of extraterrestrial life plausible. I think it's absolutely plausible that there's extraterrestrial. Yeah. But in terms of...
And in the Bible, it doesn't state anywhere that there isn't.
Right, exactly. And so there's no reason to, I think, take a hard stance at this moment about the question of extraterrestrial life. But I just never influenced me much. So it's got a frequency. My first initial impression to this is like, it's kind of a category error. So a category error is a kind of intellectual error where you ask a question, a why question that doesn't apply to the thing that you're answering. So for instance, why do all mountains have valleys? Well, if you understand what a mountain is, you will understand why it's nonsense to ask that question.
Right. So
is God a frequency? Is God and then fill in the blank with some other thing in the universe is a category error, because God is not a being. He's not like a microphone or like gravity or like some created thing in existence. He is the ground of all those things. I've talked about it. His essence is existence. And so
I was gonna say that I feel like you already answered this question, but I had it, in my notes, so I wanted to make sure we got to it. But yeah,
here's-
you did answer the question.
Yeah.
He is a frequency, but also more, right?
Well,
it's what you would say on that.
I would say he's not a frequency because that limits him to whatever a frequency is.
I mean like he's everything. It's right, including a frequency.
Well, he's not his. This is what's interesting and what differentiates Christianity from something like Hinduism or other forms of what's called panentheism, which is kind of what you're describing.
Okay.
These sorts of frequency views often are what's called panentheists or monists. Spinoza is an example of someone who believed in monism, where all this stuff, everything in the universe, is like something like God's body or God's mind or like parts of God.
Okay.
Christianity says that God is indeed omnipresent. He is everywhere present and filling all things, as the Eastern Orthodox like to say in their liturgy, and that's absolutely true. But he's also, and here's where it gets tricky, he's not his creation. So God is everywhere, and he's everywhere present, and he fills everything, but he is not the creature.
What do you mean by not the creature? I don't understand that.
So God is the creator,
Okay.
and he creates creatures. So creatures are both animals, people,
Right.
plants, but also gravity, materiality, stuff that exists in the world, emotions, so physical and non-physical objects, but things, right? Those are creatures, and God is not those things. However, he is their creator, and so that's what Christians will believe. Now, he is present in the same way that I'm present in the room, but I'm not the room. I'm in front of the microphone, but I'm not the microphone. We even could say, I have a body, but I am not just reducible down to my body. If you take my body, that's not all that there is to me. There's this sort of remainder that we call the soul or the person or something like that. And so that's how Christians would differentiate themselves from any kind of monistic or panentheist view or frequency type view. God can never be his creature. Jesus, of course, comes in here. What is Jesus? He's
I was
God.
about to ask you that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's good. You're following then. That's awesome. So Jesus is the incarnation. And so Christians have believed that Jesus is the Word, the Logos. And John 1 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And it continues on, and it says, and then the Word became flesh. And so Jesus is God fully, and he has always existed and will always exist. But at some point in human history, he chose to become flesh. He chose to become human, really human. And so Christians believe that he has a divine nature and a human nature, and they're two natures in one person, perfectly united. And
Is that why you also stated that when he was here, the heaven and the earth were so close through him?
That's excellent. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. That's you're 100%. Yeah, right. Well said.
Okay, and then so then let's talk about this tablets thing. Okay. So he stated that these tablets are older than the Bible.
Probably true. Sure.
Okay,
yeah.
so what do you make of that in God's creation?
So a lot of things are older than the Bible, and a lot of things give different worldviews about the Bible. The Enuma Elish, for instance, or the Book of the
Anunnakis, whatever.
Yeah, Anunnaki stuff as well. Just because something's older doesn't mean it's correcter. That's not a word,
right.
But you know.
But I mean. Do you believe of its existence based on the evidence that we have from these tablets?
Of what's existence?
The Anunnakis, or this type of people, the bird people, or whatever, aliens that deposited us in here, or do you feel like this is part of a Bible story, or
I think that
a lot of it that he brought up was from the Book of Enoch as well,
which is not scripture. You know, that's always important. There's a reason why the Book of Enoch is not scripture. Christians believe it's for various things that it's not inspired word. So there's a lot that's made out of the Book of Enoch because it's really weird.
Okay.
The Book of Enoch talks about, half demon hybrids. And then frankly, there's a part in the Book of Enoch where demons come and teach humans how to make tinctures from plants that allow them to see the spirit realm. entheogenics, okay, like the LSD that we were talking about earlier. So does things like the Book of Enoch or these tablets or the Enuma Elish or the Anunnaki, do these things, are they ancient? Yeah, probably. Are they expressions of a worldview? Yeah, probably. But
do they challenge the Bible as he stated? Is my question in your view. I mean, obviously to me it doesn't. We believe we're Christians.
No,
but
I think that
how do you argue his point of view?
Yeah,
is what
I would say he makes anyone who talks about aliens in the kind of Xenochrist way. Have you ever heard of the theory of a Xenochrist? No. Jesus was an alien implanted.
Oh yeah, that's why he said actually that Jesus was an alien. Yeah.
There's almost no proof of this. Yeah. And the proof that's there is so contrived where if you just go back to the texts themselves and you read what they're saying, most of the times these guys are not reading Akkadian. They're not reading ancient Assyrian. They're reading translations of translations of translations of translations. No one in Egyptology takes these theories seriously. Why are they fringe theories on the internet? Well, someone who believes them would say, well, because there's this cabal of people who are trying to keep the truth. That's so much to believe, in comparison to what seems to me to be obvious is that, dismissing the category error is that, they're just not talking about that sort of thing. These are just ancient texts, just like any other ancient text talking about spiritual beings in the same way that any other ancient text talks about spiritual beings. I think I'm more interested in why do you think people want aliens to exist so bad? Like, I think it does something for them. I think it explains away things that they don't want to have to confront. If all religions are just aliens, then I can be in control of my life, and it's just not very. I believe
there's extraterrestrials. I don't necessarily believe in this stuff, but the universe is so big. I mean, if every star that we see in the sky is a sun, who are we to? How do we know that God didn't create?
Sure.
Different Earths around the world. Around the universe. That, and they all have their own Bible. Maybe I don't know. Like, we don't know that, right? For sure.
Yeah. No. We also have no evidence that there is any life either, and so that's the thing, is just keeping it consistent. Well, a lot of people say what you just said. Well, we don't know, and they're absolutely right. But then what they do is they then pivot and say yes, but you also don't have evidence of yes.
I don't.
And so that's I think where.
But this man said his evidence is he saw it.
Yeah.
He saw it in Miami.
Okay,
so
yeah.
Do you think he was imagining things?
No, I think he probably saw something.
Have you seen the Discovery or the some of the shows where they put people talking about aliens and these people are explaining it in groups of people that of what they saw. Yeah. But there's also one person that says there was nothing there. Mm-hmm. I went and there was nothing there. Everything that they're crazy. Mm-hmm. So could it be something that maybe, only certain people can see? Like, my point is that they don't seem like they're lying about what they're saying. Like, it's
sure.
You know what I mean? Like, there's the way that they're talking about it. Like, even they pass lying tests on this and stuff. Yeah. So
I don't think we need to think about it in terms of are they lying or not? Like, people can be wrong and have experiences that lead them to be wrong. So again, there are communists who are true believers, who really believe and see the world through Marxism, and they're still wrong. Yeah. They have and other people agree with them even. They have the same experience. Yes, of course there's class conflict, and yes, of course, whatever. It's just, I don't know, it's just not very rigorous usually in its thinking. It's so niche, and it requires you to invent more and more and more hypotheses to support it as it goes along.
I understand that.
And to me, that's
the problem.
That's a less simple worldview, right? That leaves more questions ultimately. Like, if I push into your worldview, I should not leave with more questions.
Absolutely. I agree.
Ideally, there's simple, elegant answers for things. Occam's razor is really important for this reason. The simplest explanation is often the best one because, there are a lot of variables, and so we need to answer things simply.
That's what I like about Christianity. It really answered a lot of questions for me, and the ones that it didn't answer, I don't really care to know. You know,
And
either
that's
I know or
ultimately
don't.
right. And that's ultimately where I think the difference lies. Is like, do you have a worldview that helps you organize the stuff that you need to have an answer for versus the stuff that you can be okay with saying, you know what, I don't know, or maybe I'm going to go with this, but ultimately, like, it doesn't depend on me having an answer to this. Whereas I think a lot of these other worldviews, like, you have to have an answer for every single
Yeah.
little thing. Like a lot of these alien worldviews, you have to explain everything.
Yeah, which can make you go crazy at the end, or find an idea that's not real true.
Well, it just seems exhausting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, last topic here, and then we're out. We got the God of Spinoza.
I love this.
So I was talking to a friend of mine, somebody that I admired, deeply. I've known him since I was very little. He was my brother's best friend, and he was very concerned with me, becoming a Christian, and I think every Christian goes through this. Probably, there's a friend or people that question your beliefs or
Think you joined
or
a
why do you
cult.
do it, and some of the things that he mentioned was how he figured out that the best way to live as a man is to trust yourself, to believe in yourself, over everything. He was talking about also, having brotherhood, that he feels like a certain type of responsibility for allowing me to go into Christianity instead of teaching me that I don't need any of that. Like you can. He mentioned, I go fishing and I'm by myself and I like by myself, I'm okay in my thoughts. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like you don't need, somebody to tell you how to live or somebody to, make a comment on every decision that you make or, which I push back a lot on. Listen, that's not what church does. Like there's not people telling you, how to live.
Well, that's also either right or wrong too. Like at the end of the day, either what he's saying is true or not. And I would ask that
and
question.
some
like,
churches may be that way,
of course,
which
absolutely.
makes sense.
No, they are, unfortunately. But
But he basically went to this towards the end, which is he told me you need to learn about the God of Spinoza, and I got into it a little bit just out of curiosity because I'm curious about everything. That's how I ended up with Christianity, because we got curious about a lot of stuff.
yeah. I took a class on Spinoza in undergrad.
Nice. So tell me what you learned in that class. Why do you not believe in it? I mean, it seems like what was his name? The guy that was right here. What's his name? I forgot.
Oh, why am I forgetting too?
Come on, bro.
Einstein.
He's right. Einstein.
Albert
There you
Einstein.
go.
Sorry.
I almost
it was
said,
contagious.
I almost said it is the same, right? Einstein.
Albert Einstein.
Epstein. Okay,
No,
I almost said
way
Epstein.
different.
I'm like, that's not the one. I know it's not.
No,
Okay,
way different.
So Einstein believed in him. Is that
That's
how it
interesting
goes?
because again, I would plug that channel Truth Unites with the ministry of Gavin Ortland. He has a recent video on Einstein's theology, and I don't think he was a Spinozist. Baruch Spinoza was, I believe, a 17th century philosopher. He was Jewish, and he rejected the Judaism of his childhood, and he also rejected the Christianity of his country that he lived in. And instead, he recovered a tradition that came from Greek philosophy that is sometimes called monism, or sometimes called panentheism. And I've already mentioned actually both of those terms already. And basically it's the idea that, he takes the idea, because God is that thing that which greater we cannot conceive of. We can't conceive of a greater being than God. Well, what can I think of that's the greatest thing in the world? And he basically argues that God is the universe. The universe is God, God is the universe, that they're the same term for the same thing.
Isn't there truth to that in some ways?
Well, for a Christian, no, because remember, the universe is a creature, and God is the creator. And so God is not the creature.
That's right. Okay.
Yep. That's
Man.
the major.
Wow,
It's subtle. It's so subtle.
I know. It's like, okay, well, if God is everywhere, then he is, but he's not. He's the creator. I get it.
Yep.
Okay. I see where I got confused there.
So Spinoza would go on to argue. I'm vastly oversimplifying here. Spinoza is a notoriously difficult philosopher to read. He's very hard to read. He's very hard to understand. He's only translated it. He's dealing with really intense stuff. But he recovers these traditions from ancient Greek philosophy, as well as some other impulses of this idea of an anima mundi, which is it sounds Spanish, but it's the Latin phrase, the soul of the world, or the heart of the world. This idea of, again, the universe being more like an organism
Okay.
than a big pile of inert dead matter and rocks and stuff. And there's some truth to that, right?
Right. Can I
Yeah.
add to that? Okay, so something in me tells me, like in my dreams sometimes, you know, I know I spin off a lot. Okay. In my dreams sometimes I feel like we are tiny little specks of something greater, in the same way that our cells are tiny little specks
Yeah.
in us. And through that, I feel like there's a loop where we end up right back in where we are right now.
Here's where I would affirm these sorts of dispositions that are like spinozistic in nature, or where monism and where panentheism and these ideas of a world soul and of the universe being an organism and of us being these tiny parts in a greater organism, right? Here's where I think Christians need to affirm it, and then I'm going to say where we need to walk back from it.
Yeah.
Where we need to affirm it is Christians need to realize that the creatures have a direct and unique relationship with the Creator. So let me give you an example from the Bible. I think in the book of 2 Kings, but it might be 2 Chronicles. People can look this up and check me. The people of God, Israel, are being criticized by the prophet because they are not following a law that God gave them to rest the land on the 7th year. So they were supposed to farm for 6 years, and then on the 6th year, they're supposed to gather twice of what they would normally gather and store it away, because they're not going to harvest next year, and they're supposed to let the land lie fallow and rest. And we know that there are all kinds of ecological and biological reasons why you should let your fields rest. It helps your productivity. Science has told us this now. But back then they didn't have science. They had God's law, and this was the law. And they weren't doing that. They were forcing the land to produce for them. They were grinding all the time. 7 years, 7 years, 7 years, never resting. God sends a prophet and says, hey, I'm going to wipe you off this land because the land is crying out to me. The land is talking, apparently. Now, is it literally talking or is it poetic? Well, it's poetic, but the point is, it's not telling us whether the land is alive or not. It's telling us that God has a direct relationship to the land, and humans have a direct relationship to God through the land. God gave us the land not to misuse, but to use for our proper enjoyment and for our sustenance, but according to God's rules. And so the prophet says that the land is crying out to God for its Sabbaths. One other example, when Cain kills Abel, God comes up to Cain and says, your brother's blood cries out to me from the land. All right. And so
That's right.
this idea, again,
I read that part.
again, Christianity, the Bible contains, and I think this is completely orthodox, right teaching, that God's creatures, other than humans, the land, the earth, God cares about them. And they worship God by being who they are. They, the orange tree glorifies God and worships God by being an orange tree, by producing. This is called the concept of teleology. It's a fundamental principle of classical Christian philosophy, where Spinozists and other forms of like world is an organism, universe is God type things get right, is they get that impulse. They get that this isn't just dead matter, that this matters, it's important, and that it's somehow alive and part of a bigger picture. But where they get wrong is they identify God with the creation. And that's the only mistake that they make, I think, in terms of what we're talking about right now.
Okay.
So that's what I would affirm in it. I would say, like, it's unfortunate that Christians, now I think that there's good reason to be skeptical of the Bill Gates, George Soros type environmentalism. We should not just trust the UN for anything, but
Yeah.
but there is a Christian environmentalism. Christians kind of wrote the book about caring for the environment, and we need to recover that a little bit and not be so willing to sacrifice the land on the altar of the grind,
Right.
because that's what the Israelites did, and the land cries out, and God will stand up and He'll avenge the land.
Yeah, you also mentioned to me that a Christian came up with the Big Bang Theory.
Yeah, it was George Lemaitre. He was a Catholic priest, but for all intents and purposes, he was an Orthodox Christian. He believed that Jesus was the Son of God, born of a virgin, all the works. And many people don't realize this, but at the time, the reigning view of the universe, Spinoza believes this actually. Spinoza recovered this. In fact, Spinoza is actually a huge reason why physics at the time in the 1910s and 1920s believed that the universe was eternal. It always existed and it will always exist. It was an always existent being. It was just there.
Okay.
Period. And so Aristotle, Spinoza, pagans always believed this. Well, when George Lemaitre came out with the theory of the Big Bang, which basically claimed that the universe had a set beginning in time, the atheist physics community and the academic physics community, the secularized community, were like, that is the most theological, made-up fairy tale BS I've ever heard. And they rejected it because they thought it was too Christian. And of course, that's ironic.
Because today everybody thinks that is too
atheistic.
Yeah.
And so Lewis writes about this. There's a really great essay that C.S. Lewis writes about where he talks about, and I would say this relates to politics as well. You know, the trends and the theories of who's in power or what scientific model of the universe is currently agreed upon or how old the Earth is according to most scientists. These theories come and go. And one minute, you might have a theory that's in vogue that agrees with your view of what the Bible says. Don't get triumphalistic about it.
Yeah.
Because tomorrow there could be an Albert Einstein that comes up and says, hey, actually, general relativity exists, and what we thought was a mechanistic universe of dead machines is actually pretty uncertain. It's almost like, someone's down there making decisions,
Yeah.
And so...
Or like the theory of take the vaccine.
Yeah, yeah, man, dude, seriously, you're right.
Yeah,
I mean,
I understand.
we need to keep these things in their own lane, and
Absolutely.
remember that things change. So,
Did you finish explaining the Spinoza thing?
yeah, I think that's
so,
what
right?
I would say about it is,
Yeah. Yeah.
don't confuse the creator for the creature, but also don't pretend like it's all dead, because it matters to God and it's a creature too. Gravity is a creature. I love saying this to my students. Gravity is a creature. Never forget that God created gravity and is there for a creature, and He cares about it and He loves it, and it obeys Him by being gravity. Now, that doesn't mean it's alive.
I get it. I get it.
It's a cool vision. It's kind of enchants
I
the
understand
world a
that.
little bit.
Yeah. Okay, so one last thing. We got a video here from Elon Musk that was released. Let me get into a comment here, but doesn't God use the unlikely at times to rise up a people or nation? Yeah, I believe we spoke about that. To Anthony, for someone who is genuinely interested in truth, surely has questions and doubts about Christianity, where do you recommend they start?
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage folks, if you feel comfortable going to a local church. I know it's really hard. I would ask you to pray. I would just say, actually, before even that, sit down and pray. And your prayer does not have to be perfect, and it does not have to.
How do you start praying if you've never prayed before? What would be like a good way?
I would say close your eyes and just talk to God. Don't put any rules on what you're doing. If you want to feel like you're reaching out kind of, outside of your own little world, great, fine. But you don't need to, just talk and just be honest. God, a prayer that I love is a prayer that one of my friends prayed that was the reason he ended up getting saved. God, I don't believe in you, but if you're out there, you're going to have to make me believe. He prayed that, and that's how he became a Christian.
Wow.
Now,
That's interesting.
I'm not saying repeat those words and it'll happen,
Right.
but wherever you're at,
And what you feel.
go into that
State it.
quiet space of your heart and just state it to God.
Can I ask you,
Yeah.
does God talk to you like with words? Do you hear him?
No,
Okay.
no, I don't hear anything. I know he's there, but it's nothing like, again, it's like, it's like how we see each other right now because of the light, but we don't see the light. Like
Yeah.
we see lights, but the actual light in the space between our eyes, and we don't see it, but we see everything else by it. Again, that Lewis quote is for me more of what it's like.
Yeah.
It's the sense
I
of
see him in
reading.
so many actions,
Yeah.
in so many ways. When I pray, I can't have, I don't know that I can have a conversation ever, but I just, I try to be thankful. When I'm struggling, I do ask questions, tough questions. Just, it's good to note it down. It's good to state it out,
For sure.
sometimes out loud. And I get a lot of feedback back from God in different ways
Yeah,
than just
absolutely.
him, stating it.
Well, that's what that's what I would say in terms of listening. What does listening mean? I mean, it doesn't just mean literally with your ears
Yeah,
listening.
like, come on, God, where are
Yeah.
you? Like, why are you not saying anything?
Pay attention after you pray to your life in the next couple
Exactly.
days, and see if you can recognize His fingerprints on your life or on little moments of your life.
You ever heard that joke? There's a guy on a raft, and it's funny because I'm Cuban. Okay, it's a guy on a raft, and
make
he's
that joke.
he's praying. Have you heard it?
I think so. Or he's like, send the
Somebody comes over to save him. And he's like, "It's okay, God will save
Oh
me."
yeah. I love this.
And then another one, "It's okay, God will save me." And he keeps praying to God to please save him, and all of a sudden, he died. And then he meets God
Where
and
were
asks him,
you?
"Where were you? I sent you 2 people, and you never answered."
I love that joke because it's theologically correct.
Right.
God works. This is called God's economy. It's the idea that God works through history. He works through political processes,
Through people.
through people and experiences and things we can see. But again, the true sight of those things is beyond what we see with our eyes. We see them with the eyes of faith.
Yeah.
And so, this might be a conversation between 2 people physically,
But it's a lot more.
but spiritually it's more.
That's what I was gonna say too. In answers to that too, is that I remember, before the church, and honestly, even till today, I still struggle with pride a little bit in terms of asking another man for help, and
it's
stuff
hard.
like that. It's like it's hard for me to deal with that because I feel like I have to do it on my own, or I don't want to bother somebody. Like, things are already so hard. Like, I don't want to bother somebody out of their day to help me out with something. So, through that, how many missed opportunities that God is placing in front of you are you saying no to?
I struggle with that too because
You know?
I was raised, be a man.
Like, I could have been afraid to ask you on this podcast.
Sure.
And never asked you, and we never had this conversation. And like, there's so many things that you can say no to by not allowing, by your pride or your fear to get in the way.
Well, and what's sad about that is what that inoculates you to is surprise. This emotion that is like actually really, really intense and present for people who believe in the Lord is surprise. I mean, think about how surprised the disciples were when they found out that not only was the way that God was going to bring about the restoration of all things through this man, Jesus, but then through the cross, and then through the resurrection, and then through the church, and then through the New Jerusalem. Like, behold, I am doing a thing, when you hear of it, your ears will tingle. Like, I love the Bible's language for that. He wants to make us say, like, wow, God, like, that's cool. That's, to me, I don't know other worldview.
There's a
lets me
lot of
have it.
beauty
Yeah,
in that,
yeah,
for sure. Okay. Your other friends have brought us up Spinoza. Okay, all right, we already talked about that. Okay, so last thing. This is the last thing.
saw
Okay, we're
this,
past the
yeah.
3 hours. Okay, so Elon Musk on the woke mind virus. I'd like to hear your take on it, and then we'll go from that.
It happened to one of my older boys, where I was essentially tricked into signing documents for one of my older boys, Xavier. This was before I had really any understanding of what was going on, and we had COVID going on, and so there was a lot of confusion. I was told, Xavier might commit suicide if he
That was a lie right from the outset.
incredibly evil, and I agree with you that people that have been promoting this should go to prison.
That's
So I was
personal connection.
tricked.
Don't you feel like Jordan Peterson should have just shut up for a little bit and let him, because
He gets a
Elon
little
Musk
talky
gets very,
sometimes.
like, especially when he's like into his emotion, you gotta just let him.
He takes a long time to say what he.
Right.
I relate to that.
Like I'm like right. I'm like Jordan. Like just be quiet for a second.
into doing this, and it wasn't explained to me that puberty blockers are actually just sterilization drugs. Anyway, and so I lost my son essentially. They call it dead naming for a reason.
Yeah,
All right. So the reason it's called dead naming is because your son is dead. So my son Xavier is dead, killed by the woke mind virus.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what that would be like.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and there's lots of people in that situation now.
Right.
It's not pretty, and lots of demolished kids.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's a good reason to be the final straw. All right, so let's.
So I vowed to destroy the woke mind virus after that, and we're making some progress.
Join the club.
Yeah.
So first off, if you could give me some feedback on what you think of Elon Musk, because I think he's like amazing, and sometimes I wonder if I'm, becoming too much of a fan and gotta like pull back a little bit. So what is your thoughts on Elon and what he's doing for the United States and the world, and then just thoughts on this specific situation, the woke mind virus?
So I don't have particularly strong thoughts on Elon. I mean, he's a business person. He clearly is cut from a different cloth. I think he represents a sort of the new economy moving forward. Clearly has rejected the economic orthodoxy of liberalism. He clearly is not interested in what the economic policy of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s from both neoconservatism and neoliberalism has gotten us. So those are kind of like high-level comments in terms of his policies. Beyond that, I don't really have a particularly strong opinion of him. I do know that this quote, he has a flair for the dramatic at times, and so I think that he has a kind of expressive way of talking, and so when he said, my son was killed by the woke mind virus, and his delivery is so like, I think he's being authentic in that moment. I don't see any reason to question his authenticity, but when he's when he's saying it like that, it got picked up on Reddit and people are making fun of him for it, and I think people are doing that just to not talk about what he's talking about, because I do see people who are not Christians in positions of power, such as Elon Musk, such as Jordan Peterson, who is playing with the label. Yeah. I think he still does not assent in any, again, orthodox way. Maybe someone like Donald Trump, I'm not sure. It's hard because we're not the judges, but at the same time we're called to use our judgment. I don't know.
Yeah.
But what we are seeing is powerful people outside the church getting tired of postmodern progressivistic identity politics and gender ideology, which should be expected because it's not true. And it's based on ideas that are not proven and are falsifiable. And I think people are starting to see that this is a wrong turn. Again, this is a great example of a place where I can kind of talk about, this is the same worry I have with Trump. But he says at the end, I vowed to destroy it. As a Christian, what Elon is going to use tools-wise to destroy the woke mind virus is never going to be the same set of tools that a Christian is allowed to use to destroy evil. Christians are always more limited because we are called to emulate Christ, and Christ used the tool of sacrifice, service, and conversion. Elon will not use those tools. And so that is where, again, just like Spinoza, there's some good, there's some bad. With Elon in this particular issue, as a Christian, I would say, and I'll just speak for myself, I don't want to tell people what to think. People got to work this stuff out on their own. But for me, I agree with him that it is a woke mind virus. It is absolutely detrimental both to the wellness of children, to society as a whole, to our democratic processes. You know, this idea that gender and sex are utterly decoupleable and fluid, and you know, gender is really just this performance. No, that's a bad idea. It's wrong, and it's going to cause pain. How do you deal with bad ideas? How do we deal with the evil in the world? That's why I believe the gospel, because I think if it's an arms race, if it's about getting power and beating the other guy, wise philosopher, the Jedi Qui-Gon Jinn from episode 1 said there's always a bigger fish. And that's why I think ultimately that Jesus came and died. He defeated evil through sacrifice, through service, and through obedience, through conversion. And I think that's the only way to break the cycle of endless power and endless struggle. I think that's the only way to beat a Marxist view of the world that says, or a Darwinist view of the world. What do Marxism and Darwinism have in common? They both say at the bottom level of reality, it's not good and evil, it's strong and weak. But Christianity can't do that, ever. That's what Christians have to say no to, is they have to say at the end of the day, it is good and evil, and our God is good, and our God has won the victory for us, you know, through the cross. Now, does that mean, you know, you can't have a political arrangement where Elon Musk and you are pursuing the same ends? No, not necessarily. Maybe you guys can work together.
Yeah.
But ultimately, again, I would say our hope is in the Lamb ultimately, and in this way of the cross. We always have to make sure that our allegiances to both political systems, to power, they're always secondary. It
makes everything that you're saying makes so much sense to me. I mean, I remember the feeling that I got right away as soon as I saw the Olympics. I was pissed off.
Oh, dude.
I wanted to create a video. It's unacceptable. I wanted to defend the Christians. And, you know, you don't make fun of Jesus and blah, blah.
Did you hear how they're covering themselves now? They're saying, oh, we weren't depicting the Last Supper. We were depicting the Feast of Bacchus.
Yeah.
But what people misunderstand, and people are like, look, so it's fine. But what they don't understand is the Feast of Bacchus and that picture by Leonardo da Vinci of the Last Supper in our brains, they're modeled after each other because Leonardo da Vinci was a Renaissance painter. Wow. And so he was looking at Greek art and copying Greek art to depict Christian things.
Wow.
And so any artist who's like, no, I wasn't really depicting the Last Supper, bull.
Yeah.
You know there's ambiguity there. And the fact that you had a bunch of drag queens up there means that you know what the word ambiguity means and you're playing with it, okay? So I don't buy that for a second, but go on, sorry.
It's just, I saw people like Andrew Tate, you know who Andrew Tate is?
Yeah.
You know, talk about, this is why I hate Christianity. People are not, where are all the Christians that are outraged that this happened? You know?
That's a dude that worships power, though.
Right.
And look, he turned to Islam. That's what I mean. Like, ultimately, if religious,
that is such a good wow.
Why did he turn to Islam? You know what I mean?
Because he worships power.
Of course,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's a delight Andrew Tate so much. Like there's so much of him that I'm like, yeah, like what? Like I'm hungry for that. Like let's like,
that's exactly right. Yeah,
let's show
no one
up
else
to
is saying
that, right? But but this is very true. It's because he worships power. He does not. It makes complete sense. There was always something about him that, to me, was missing.
There's no place in his worldview for holy weakness. No place in his worldview for weakness. No place for self-sacrifice, except for what the lone wolf wants, right? Maybe I'll self-sacrifice. You know, I won't eat that thing because I'm grinding for that other thing. But for real weakness, Jesus is a beta to him. You know what I mean? Like, he's weak, and so Christians gotta wrestle with that, man. It's hard, and it's counterintuitive because, like, what's more natural than surviving? Nothing. But the gospel comes and says, hey, you know this thing that you love so much, your life, lay it down, and I'll give you eternal life instead.
Damn,
for real.
I'm just gonna end it right there. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. This is episode 24. Yeah. This is it. That was the perfect finish. Make sure you like, subscribe. I'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you so much, Anthony. This was a pleasure. I really appreciate it, buddy.
Man.
And let's
Loved
do it
it
again sometime soon,
sure,
please.
for sure.
Now my people know you. And on the next one, maybe we could talk about certain events or something like that
Yeah.
once it happens.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, man.
All right, guys, we are out. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. This is We the People.